I work overnight in a hotel at the front desk, running the night audit. Now, A. I've always been a skeptic to anything religious or paranormal, but I've always found a bit of interest in the possibilities of what if? And B. I haven't seen or experienced anything really weird or unbelievable myself. 95% of my time is spent in the lobby, but I have heard many co-workers who have claimed to have seen things over the years. Most of them have worked in security or back of the house operations. My hotel is an older hotel in a downtown metropolis. We are in a skyscraper with over 20 floors above ground and several below. We have several ballrooms and event spaces. Our grand ballroom is 2 levels below street level. We have another ballroom and several event rooms on our second floor just above the lobby. We have meeting rooms on our 3rd floor, and our top floor is all banquet/event space. Guest rooms start on the 4th floor and go all the way to the 2nd highest floor, which again is purely event space. Overnight, these event areas lie dormant and dark, but are routinely patrolled throughout the night by our security staff, who are mostly just making sure that guests haven't gotten lost, or that a homeless person hasn't snuck into one of these spaces and set up camp, which does happen occasionally. Mostly though, there's nothing. Well, mostly nothing. And here we find the creepy things that can't be explained. Almost every security guard has been uncomfortable walking around on the 3rd floor alone at night, as opposed to any other floor in the hotel. With it being strictly meeting rooms, there are no guests after hours on this floor, and it is very quiet. The hall lights on this floor are always on regardless. Still, numerous security guards over the years have talked about feeling like they were being watched on this floor, and are overcome with a feeling of not wanting to be there. And a few of them have reported experiencing the same phenomenon of hearing a little girl's laughter, or seeing what looked like a little girl just out of the corner of their eye. This little girl spirit, who has been identified by different employees over the years, even ones who haven't worked together. But then there is also another presence that lingers on the 3rd floor and gives them a sense of dread. Then there's the north stairwell. We have 2 stairwells in the building, one on the north side and one on the south. These are most commonly used for fire evacuation, or employees, or the occasional guest who'd rather get a good workout than take the elevator. Anyway, there's an urban legend surrounding the north stairwell. Legend has it that decades ago, when the hotel was young, a little boy fell from the stairwell from the top floor and died. Since then, I've heard reports from security, housekeepers, banquet people, all sorts, about hearing a little boy running and playing in the stairwell, and then finding that there's no one there. Chalk it up to a ghost or overactive imaginations, but if there is a record of said death, I haven't seen it. Still, many people have claimed to have had the same experience, even guests. Then there is the case of the shadow person on the top floor. A couple of years ago, we had this security guard who didn't believe in anything he couldn't see, but he had an experience on the top floor that freaked him out so badly, he never returned. He was pale as a sheet and in a cold sweat. When he does his patrols, he would normally keep the lights off and shine a flashlight at anyone he may have found, usually a homeless person who had snuck in for a quick nap, in order to disorient them and gain the upper hand. He had pretty good vision in the dark, and a great sense of the layout of things, even in the inky blackness. So anyway, he's on his patrol on the top floor one night. The lights are out, and he sees a clear outline of someone standing in front of the window on the far side of the room, silhouetted against the lights from the city against the skyline. He decides he's going to sneak up quietly on this person, and quickly turn the flashlight on to surprise them. He's watching the person closely, and can make out the unmistakable human shape of them. Solid, impermeable, firm. When he's about 15 feet away, he quickly turns on his flashlight. But as the beam hits where the person was supposed to be, there's nothing. Just a reflection of the flashlight in the window. Dust in the air, and nothing more. Confused, he looks around, shining his light this way and that. But no one is there. The room is empty. He turns the light off. The shape that was in front of the window is gone. He walks over to where it was, and takes a moment to look out over the city confused, thinking that his imagination must have been playing tricks on him. But at the same time, he also felt like he was being watched, and had a feeling of slight dread wash over him that made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle up. He turned around back to the door, and was instantly shocked again. It should have been closed, but there again was the shadow of a person, only solid, and this time he saw eyes glowing red, looking at him. He was frozen for a moment, and watched as the figure slowly and silently backed out of the room and closed the door. That's when my security guard noped out of there, hopped on the elevator, came back down to the lobby to tell me what happened, and my other desk agent, and my bellman. We'd never seen him like this before, and he swore that he was telling the truth. So we took turns going up to investigate for ourselves. Granted, it was creepy up there with all the lights out, and we did feel uncomfortable, like we were being watched. Maybe it was just our imaginations running wild because we were expecting to see something. Or perhaps he was right, and there was something vicious up there. Who knows? After that night though, he was always reluctant to do his rounds, and did so with the lights on. That's his story. Finally, ghost calls. Now this is something that I personally have experienced, though it could easily be dismissed as faulty wiring or crossed connections in the phone line. Who knows? It's an old building that's undergone numerous renovations. There's bound to be a few electrical quirks here and there. Anyway, every call to the hotel comes through BPX, our phone operator. The operator is tucked away in a room in the back of the house, just behind the front office. A front desk team member will cover BPX when the operator needs to go on break, so I take over back there frequently during these times, since there are 2 of us at the front desk. That way, we still have coverage at the desk and on the phones at all times. We are a fairly large hotel. Overnight, we don't get as many calls as during the day, but they do come through. Most calls are set as wake-up calls, our guest inquiries about the hotel or the city, maybe even late-night dining options. Then there's the occasional person who wants to make a reservation at 3 AM or speak to the front desk, who we patch through. And then there are the ghost calls. We call them the ghost calls because there's no one there making the call. The room just calls. And there are a handful of specific rooms that make ghost calls to BPX, and occasionally to the front desk also. But mostly it's just to BPX. What happens is the operator gets a call from one of those rooms, and all they hear is either silence or just static for a period of time, before an eventual disconnect. But it's not just one call. The calls will come sporadically for hours sometimes. Usually it's only one room calling over and over, seemingly at a whim, sometimes two. But it's always one of the regular ghost rooms. I know them by heart by now. The calls will come whether the room is occupied or vacant, but even if the room is occupied, it's not the guest making the call. One night, a long time ago, a new operator got his first ghost call on BPX, got a long bit of silence before hearing the click, and wanted to make sure the guest was okay. So the operator called the room back, and the guest answered. The operator had asked the guest if they had tried to call, but the guest, who hadn't touched the phone at all during their stay, until just when the operator called, said that they had not. The operator apologized for disturbing them, assuming they got the wrong number, and hung up. A few minutes later, that same room was calling, but it wasn't the guest. It was a ghost call. You get the idea. Normally the phone won't work if the room is vacant and not checked in. But for whatever reason, the ghost rooms will call whenever they please. Sometimes we go months without ghost calls. Then all of a sudden, a room will be active for a night or a few days. Then back to business as usual. Almost everyone who's worked the phones has received their fair share of ghost calls. Engineering has checked and rechecked the phone system and the wiring, and everything appears to be normal. We're stumped as to why this happens, and while there is probably a rational explanation for it, I would say that it is still under the category of creepy and unexplainable. And yes, guests do occasionally pass away in hotel rooms. And no, I don't know if these rooms specifically have been rooms that guests have passed away in. Make your own connections. Old hotels are full of stories. They're ripe for urban legends and myths. Whether or not there is anything to those stories is another matter, but some are definitely creepy and unexplainable. Just because you can't rationalize something doesn't mean there isn't a rational explanation for it. But honestly, where's the fun in that? Sometimes it's just fun to let yourself believe for a moment that something could possibly be, and roll with it. If anything, it makes for a good story. Years ago, I used to work at a church as the head sound engineer. The bulk of that job required me to be active during the day for Sunday services. Occasionally, there were tasks that could be done whenever I got the chance. One of these tasks was duplicating CDs of sermons for people who would like a copy to listen at home or in the car. I would get requests for various sermons, sometimes series spanning months, and have to make extra time to fulfill them, since it usually took quite a while. Since I am a night owl, oftentimes I would head to the church and take care of these duplication requests in the middle of the night. It never bothered me, and I had a key to get into the church whenever I needed to. One particular night, I headed into the church sometime around 1 or 2 a.m. Since I knew the building like the back of my hand, I rarely turned the light on inside the building. The ambient light from the streetlights would illuminate through the windows just enough so that I could see where I was going. but beyond that, the building was pitch dark. Now, the way this church was laid out was that there was a foyer, which then had doors into the church sanctuary, where the services were held. The sanctuary had a balcony, and on this balcony was the sound booth, where the CD duplicator was located. There was only one door to the balcony, which could be locked from the inside, which was also located in the foyer, with a staircase leading up to it. The balcony is completely open, not separated by glass or anything, and provides a completely unobstructed view of the sanctuary below. The pews, stage, all of it. Acoustically, the room is very good. If someone was on the stage talking, you could easily hear it from the back of the church and balcony. If for some reason you couldn't see what you were listening to, you could easily make out from which part of the room the sound was coming from. This comes into play later. When I reached the top of the stairs to the balcony and the sound booth, I turned on a light so I could begin working. Just a single bulb, about 15 feet above my head. I had no need to turn on anything more than that. This was the only light in the entire sanctuary. I know that might seem crazy to some, but this was a building I had spent hundreds of hours in by myself at night. I felt completely comfortable at the time. I began duplicating CDs, lost in my thoughts and the peaceful silence of the enormous room. After about an hour or so of silence, a sound abruptly rang out that startled me, about 20 to 30 feet above and below me, in the middle of the pews on the left-hand side. I heard a distinctive clink, clink sound. It was subtle, but clear, and unmistakable to me. Over and over. I knew exactly what this sound was. Let me explain. In another part of the church, we had a coffee house of sorts, where people would load up on coffee and donuts every Sunday morning. The coffee was always dispensed into ceramic coffee mugs. Literally, the most basic, commonly used mug you can imagine. Your kitchen cupboards are likely full of them. Anyway, due to the high volume of these mugs that circulated through the church, there were always baristas from the coffee house picking them up from around the church to be washed. Oftentimes, they would miss mugs, and they would lay hidden around the church. As multiple mugs were usually collected in one hand by the handle, mugs themselves would hit and make that very distinctive ceramic clink. It became regular background noise before, during and after services, and after about 10 years of working at this church, it's a sound I knew and recognized very well. But I would be lying if I said I ever conscientiously thought about that particular sound. So I find myself trying to process why I'm hearing coffee mugs clinking together in the middle of the night, in the middle of our church sanctuary, in the pitch dark. I stood there peering from the balcony into the darkness below, trying to make sense of it for several minutes, before curiosity got the better of me. I had to figure out what was making that sound. I descended the stairs and into the foyer, where the light switches were, and flipped them all on to the on position. I immediately felt a little better, and entered the sanctuary on the ground level. I had pinpointed where the ceramic sound was coming from when I was on the balcony, but, unfortunately, now that I was at the source with the lights on, there was nothing to be heard. It was midweek, but the sanctuary had not yet been cleaned from the previous Sunday, so I knew there was still probably a few coffee mugs inside. People frequently left them on top or underneath of pews, and everywhere in between. I walked down each row of pews, carefully scanning for mugs. Nothing. Knowing there would likely be some on the floor, I got down on my hands and knees in the very front of the sanctuary so that I could take a peek. From this perspective, I could see underneath every pew of each respective side at once. Sure enough, there were a few mugs scattered through the floor and underneath certain pews. I got up and moved to those specific pews and examined where each mug was. In hindsight, I probably should have just picked them up. I didn't, because technically it wasn't my job. But I did take note of the most important fact at the time. There were no coffee mugs in close proximity to each other. The closest were 3 or 4 feet from another mug, not even remotely close enough to clink together. While I couldn't explain the sound I heard, there was no logical way that those mugs could have made those sounds. I had no answers, but I was satisfied enough to just brush it off. I left the sanctuary, turned off the lights at the light switch in the foyer, and returned back up the stairs to the balcony, illuminated by a single light bulb above me, and consoled by the silence I found myself in once again. I resumed my tasks, and about 15 minutes passed before it happened again. Clink. In the same place as before. My heart stopped, and the hairs on my neck stood up once more. Okay, I had verified this myself. There were no mugs in enough proximity that they could somehow, for the sake of argument, be clinking on their own. They were not clinking on their own. I rushed down the stairs into the foyer and flipped on the lights once again, entering the sanctuary. I dropped to my knees once more and peered under the pews. Nothing. I knew this sound. It was unmistakable. I pinpointed where it was coming from, but there was nothing. No sound, nothing in disarray, no mugs that could be in any contact with each other. Spooked, but frustrated at the same time, I returned to the foyer. Instead of turning off all the lights, I left one on in the sanctuary. This made for 2 lights now, one in the balcony and one in the sanctuary. The addition of this light helped set me a little more at ease as I walked through the balcony door at the bottom of the stairs. I locked it from the inside. I didn't know what was going on, and maybe I was being a little paranoid at this point, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I went up the stairs once again to finish my tasks on the balcony, and just about a half hour of silence had elapsed. It was just enough for me to settle into the idea of nothing weird happening for the rest of the night. Then it happened again. It might as well have been a gunshot. I stood up and scanned from atop the balcony. There was twice as much light in there now, and enough to illuminate the room, even if it was still dim. But there was nothing. Nobody was playing a prank. There were no ghouls, spectres, or shadow people dancing around. No big, aha, revelation. The sound continued, and so did I. I wanted to go home, so I ignored it. The sooner I finished duplicating these CDs, the sooner I could get out of this damn church and get some sleep. The sound continued, again and again. Maybe another 15 minutes, maybe another half an hour. I lost track of time. All I know was that eventually, it stopped. The silence returned. At one point, I resolved that all of this was ridiculous. There had to be a rational explanation, and as such, It was stupid to hold up on my locked balcony. I went downstairs to get something to drink. On my way back, I flipped off that remaining light in the sanctuary. No need to waste electricity. I reasoned, I'm not going to let some stupid sound dictate fear all night. I returned to the balcony and left the door unlocked, illuminated once more by my single bulb, and I popped in a few more CDs. Then it happened. I don't even know how to effectively describe it, at least in a way that captures the immediacy and sheer terror of it. All at once, the entire room began to shake violently, with a deep, bassy rumble. There are no earthquakes in this part of the country, so that was immediately ruled out. Time seemed to stop as I scanned around the room trying to figure out what was going on. I looked at the soundboard. You know those LEDs they have going from green to yellow to red? The thing was maxed out in the red, indicating it was overloaded by some input. But there were no mics plugged in, no amps turned on, and no sound coming out of the speakers. I don't even think the speakers were plugged in, and if they were muted. At the time, I had done professional audio for over 5 years, and this wasn't something technical. The entire sanctuary rumbled and shook for about 30 seconds, and then it stopped. Complete silence. I was completely shaken, and I bolted out of the church and went home. I don't have any explanation for what happened, since there were no ghostly things to show themselves or anything super paranormal. I've tried to explain it with logic, but alas. I worked overnight security in one of the largest, best, and oldest hospitals in the US. My fellow security officers and I all have stories about one building in particular, but the one that I'll tell is the only one that happened to me. Backstory for the building. It was built in the late 1800s. It was the original psychiatric building for this hospital. Now, being built in the late 1800s, not much was truly known about psychiatric disorders. On top of that, this hospital was known for its medical research. With both those facts combined, you can infer that some terrible stuff was done to these misunderstood psych patients in this building. A couple of years before I started working security there, this building had been converted into offices after the newly built part of the hospital dedicated a section for an updated psych ward. Here is my story. My rounds for that night happened to include said building. At night, this building was empty, due to recently being converted into offices and the drones who worked there wanting to leave at 5, if not earlier. In some of their haste, they left their office doors unlocked, which is a big no-no, due to medical information being located in their offices. It was our duty to go to each floor and make sure that every door was locked, and if it wasn't, to secure it ourselves. I did my initial sweep of the building to make sure that it was clear, and proceeded to do my door-to-door checks. The hallways were pretty narrow, so I could check both sides of the hallway doors at once. At the end of this hallway, there were 2 sets of doors you had to go through to reach the final office, which was a dead end. Everything was secure. Awesome. Time for the next floor. I exited the 2 sets of doors from the dead-end office and stood absolutely frozen from what I saw. Every door ajar, set perfectly so their own weight wouldn't cause them to shut again, and one wheelchair at the end of said hallway facing towards the steps. I had heard other security officers outright reject that set of rounds due to strange stuff happening there, but I laughed it off until that night happened. I never took those rounds again. The old children's ICU is currently under construction to be turned into medical labs, so we have to patrol the area. Once again, to make sure the area is secure, or to report if the contractor/foreman stayed to plan for the next day. When patrolling this area, several security officers have reported seeing a single white male child of around the age of 5 to 7 with short brown hair. Think 90s bowl cut. I personally dismissed this, as this was before the psych ward incident, as a tall tale with the intent to scare me because I was new at the time. I got that building's patrol one night, and a foreman who stayed late called security and asked for a security officer to come up because a kid locked himself in a room, and I don't want him to get hurt with all the open wires in there, or something to that effect. I unlocked the door for him, looked in what can only be described as a 10x8 room for about 10 minutes, and there was no kid. I called it in as a false alarm, and finished my patrol. My third story. I had a special detail, aka babysitting a violent psych patient along with another security officer. He woke up in the middle of the night, recognized the other officer and said hello. He sees me and immediately started screaming at me for me not to hurt him. Now, I'm a rather large gentleman, at 6'2" and 250 pounds, but I'm not trying to make myself too intimidating around psych patients as not to escalate the situation. Well, he keeps screaming for me not to hurt him, and he says if I promised not to, he would make something good happen for me. I promise, and he calms down, goes back to sleep, and I forget about it. The next day, I got a permanent set of rounds and a pretty good promotion. Easily a coincidence, but interesting nonetheless. Final story. Fellow security officers had rounds in the aforementioned psych building and heard a call on the radio in what could only be described as a dry throat voice of terror for one officer for backup. I was close, so I responded to his call, letting him know I was on his way. When I got there, he had his head between his knees and was silently crying with a shattered chandelier a couple of feet away from him. Now, before I had experienced the abnormal happenings in this building, I would have written off his testimony off as idiocy. But he claimed that something held him in that spot as the chandelier started to swing wildly until it started to fall. When it started to fall, he was let go and allowed to move, and scrambled out of the way before he was hit. I got him up, calmed him down, and took him back to the supervisor. She yelled to one of our other supervisors, almost lost another one to that building. The other supervisor laughed and said, "Why do you think we send the new guys? You know I don't even like going over there." That guy is my roommate, and hates it when I bring up that experience. My story begins, promisingly enough, in an old psychiatric hospital. As I no longer live in the area nor work for the same company, I can even tell you where it is. It's called the Crichton in Dumfries, Scotland. The hospital is made up of a complex of buildings built in the 1870s. Now, you may have a mental image of such a place, but I can assure you, it's nothing like you might imagine. Beautiful buildings set in manicured parklands. It even has an imposing church built at its heart. The signs of its history are there, if you know where to look. The imposing staircase with its beautiful wrought iron guardrails may look pretty, but they're there for a purpose. To stop anyone throwing themselves 40 feet to certain death on the intricately tiled floor below. Hidden rooms that have never seen daylight. The people who work there probably aren't even aware of these hidden rooms, but they're there. As I say, you just need to know where to look. My job was a security guard. Each night I would drive slowly around the complex for an hour at a time. There are plenty of places someone with ill intent could hide, and it's just me. A 5'2" female, armed with only a torch. Prior to me starting, the company had been through 2 guards that hadn't mentioned the fact that they were afraid of the dark, but it never bothered me. It never occurred to me to feel unsafe. Part of my job was to deal with alarm calls. These were usually caused by drafts, moths, flapping curtains, nothing sinister. I would be asked, "Don't you get scared going into those old buildings alone?" Well, no, never. It just didn't occur to me to be scared of things that might go bump in the night. It was one of those beautiful midwinter nights just before Christmas. The frost bit, the moon was so bright that it cast shadows around the buildings, and if I went to the furthest end of the complex, where there were no lights, the stars. I think the stars are what I miss the most. Too much light pollution where I live now, but I remember tilting my head back and seeing the constellations and the faint haze of the Milky Way. I was driving around, minding my own business, when I heard an alarm from one of the buildings, Solway House to be precise. It's one of the oldest buildings on the complex, and the only one that looks rather dark and foreboding. These days it's used as art studios and practice rooms for budding musicians. It's not unknown for alarms to go off, so I parked up and got the keys out of the back of my van. This would be easy. There was an obvious reason for the alarm. The art class had left the external door wide open. I shut off the alarm and got out my paperwork. As I started to write, I became aware of a loud banging from one of the upper floors. My first thought was that someone was still there. My second thought is that it's 3 o'clock. It's -4 outside, and even in this art studio. Who's gonna break in? An insomniac art critic? Even so, I had to check, so up the stairs I went. I couldn't tell where the banging had come from as it had stopped. I checked each of the rooms, and no one was there, of course. All was deathly quiet. So I went back downstairs to continue with my paperwork. The banging started again, louder. It sounded as if furniture was being thrown around. Could there be a window open? Banging in the wind? Nice try. There wasn't a breath of wind, but you tell yourself these things when you're in an old psychiatric hospital on your own at the true witching hour. Nothing for it. I would have to go up again. There must be something. The banging was loud. It really did sound like furniture being thrown. Once again I went into the art studio. almost expecting the place to be trashed, but everything was in its place. I checked the windows, all locked. I even checked the toilets with their creaky pipes, but there wasn't a sound. I was perplexed. This noise must be coming from somewhere. Now, I'm as partial to a good paranormal yarn as the next person, but when you're attending an alarm activation, you're looking for tangible reasons. Companies will try and wriggle out of paying for call-outs as it is. You try putting under reason for activation, shadow people, or soul-sucking demon from the pits of hell, you could go whistle for your money, that's for sure. It's as I'm going downstairs for the second time that I feel it. My skin prickles with cold, clammy, static energy. I could swear that there's something behind me. Not someone, something. Something that doesn't want me there. Don't let it know you're there. Don't let it know you're scared. That was exactly what I was thinking. I can't explain, except I know I have felt this before. Many years ago, as I gladly moved out of a house whose negative vibe had drained my life of color. It's a feeling, like a mass of negative energy. That's all this is. That time before, it had felt malevolent. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's the only way I can describe the pure fear I felt. And so I descended the stairs, the feeling keeping pace with me. There's only one thing for it. Saint Michael, the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil, I prayed. I'm not a Catholic, but when the chips are down and the prayers to Saint Michael the Archangel can be pretty effective. It's also good when I get sleep paralysis, but that's another story. On the final turn of the stairs, the creeping feeling stopped, just like that. I'd like to say I ran out into the night like a big girly, but I had paperwork to finish. As I did, the banging started again. The sound of furniture crashing to the ground. I finished my paperwork, went to the bottom of the stairs, and shouted, "I haven't got all night for your nonsense. I'm going now, so you can knock yourself out." And that was it. I left. Later on, back in the office, I said to one of my colleagues, "Weird thing. I was at an alarm at Solway House." He stopped me. "Ghosts? Oh, aye. Solway House is haunted as. That's where they used to cremate the bodies where patients died." So there you have it. I will say one thing for the ghosts of Solway House. At least they have taste. At least they're haunting a rather beautiful, if foreboding, building. We also had a ghost in our office. Our uninspiring 1950s concrete box of an office. A ghost with no ambition. A ghost that was basically phoning it in. I prefer my ghosts with a bit of class. The sort that choose frost-bitten moonlit nights to make themselves known. I'm sure they will still be there, long after I'm gone. This happened to a friend. Let me take you back to fall of 2010, my freshman year of college. I went away to a small university in Iowa that was supposedly the oldest college in the state, but I never looked into that claim, so I can't say for sure if it was. I, like most college-aged kids, got into the party scene quickly, and the second or third weekend there, I was caught drinking underage. Because I was one of the first students busted for drinking, the school wanted to make an example of me with their punishment. Usually you had to pay a small fine, but I had to do what they called community service. The punishment turned out to be more of an embarrassment, because I had to sit in the lobby of my dorm building one Saturday night with one of the security guards of my school, so my peers would see me as they went out for the night. For the sake of the story, I'll call the security guard Terry. He was the same guy who busted me for drinking, so at first things were a little awkward between us, but he seemed like a decent guy once we started talking. Terry told me he used to be a state trooper, but decided he didn't like the danger that came with the job, and decided to take the night shift at the college as overnight security, which he had been doing for the last decade. Like I mentioned, this was a very old university that looked a bit like Hogwarts, because there were older buildings on campus that had their own urban legends of ghost sightings and unexplained noises. I didn't buy into ghost stories, so I didn't care nor investigate those claims. When Terry told me he had been at the school for a while, I asked him what was the weirdest thing he encountered on the campus. I thought maybe catching students being stupid or harmless encounters, but he told me something much more twisted. He stiffened up a little, put down his coffee cup, and looked away. I thought maybe he was joking with me, so I kind of chuckled, but the look he shot me was one of dread. He finally relaxed and began to tell me one of the scariest, weirdest stories I have ever heard. Terry's encounter took place during the second year of his job as night security guard on campus. The year before, one of the buildings on campus that served as part of the administrative offices and part dormitory had been closed for renovations. The building, Kaufman Hall, opened back up, and the school decided to keep it as offices only and build another dorm on campus. The dorm rooms were abandoned and the top floor locked to prevent students from going up there and vandalizing the place. About halfway through the first semester that year, a student had gone missing. Her friends had reported it first to the school before they called the police, because they were hoping she was just on campus and didn't try to make a big deal out of it. The daytime security crew couldn't find her, so when nighttime rolled in, Terry was asked to look for her. He urged the school to call the police, but they said they wouldn't until the following morning. Terry searched the different buildings on campus, other dorms, and pretty much everywhere imaginable. As he was walking up the hill to the top of campus, he saw one of the lights on in Kaufman Hall, the same floor that was locked up a few months ago. Terry decided he needed to check there to make sure that the girl wasn't hiding in one of the empty dorm rooms. So he went to the building's front door and noticed the doors were wide open, which was odd because it was late at night and all offices were closed. He didn't feel uneasy at this point, just confused. He began his ascent to the top floor of the building, and on the landing past the fourth story, he stopped to catch his breath. He suddenly heard on the next floor a door slamming shut. He slowly crept up the stairs and came to the door that was locked that led to the hallway of the old dorm. He tried the door, but it was locked. He wondered how that could be if he saw the light on earlier, and now the door slammed closed. He took out his key that he had on his chain, with the various keys for the school, and opened the door. He peeked his head in, and then noticed there were no lights on down the hallway that he could see, so he began to slowly walk to the other side of the top floor. As he did, he began to look in each of the rooms to see if the missing girl was in one of them. As he walked into one room, he heard footsteps down the hallway, but as Terry re-entered the long hallway, no one was there. He called out the girl's name, but just heard dead silence. Right as he began to walk further into the hall, he heard someone laughing, but not a college-aged girl, an adult man. Terry called out again, if anyone was up in the dorm hall with him. As he did, a tall man entered the hall at the opposite side of him, dressed in black, but too dark to see his face. Terry called out again, asking why he was up there, but the man came running down towards him at full speed while screaming his head off. Terry was able to quickly sprint out of the dorm, shutting and locking the door behind him. As he took a few steps down the stairs to leave Kaufman Hall, he heard the most bone-chilling laugh coming from behind the door. Terry rushed out to the security office on campus and called the police. When they arrived, they made their way to the top of Kaufman. The door to the hall he had witnessed the intruder was wide open, and no one was found. The only thing there was an old cot with some dirty blankets. The college put in new locks and hoped the intruder, who obviously had a key, would not attempt to get in again. Terry didn't care, as he would never go back up there. The next morning, the girl was found, and to be honest, for the dumbest reason. She got into a fight with her roommates and decided to go spend the weekend with her boyfriend at another college. Terry was happy the girl was back, but in a way angry she hadn't told her friend she was gone, as it could have prevented him from having that whole encounter. I was in shock after hearing that story, so I could imagine what he had gone through. Terry switched the subject to sports or something, and we never spoke of it again. I would see Terry all the time that year, and he and I became pretty friendly with each other, but the conversation was always about sports or news, never about the story he told me. The summertime came, and I went back home for the summer. At that point, Terry had gone back to being a state trooper, so I didn't see him again until a few years later when I was in a restaurant with some friends. He was there with his family, but he was nice enough to come up to my table and say hi. At this point, my friends had all heard the story, but never met Terry, so I introduced them as the guy who told me the tale. One of my friends asked if they ever caught the guy, to which Terry shook his head, but he did have one theory. One of the top administrators at the college, he didn't say who, had a son who had spent most of his teenage and early adult years in a mental institution. Around the time of Terry's encounter, the son was brought back to his family's house and would come and go as he pleased, never explaining where he went or what he did. He would be gone for days at a time, and Terry always wondered if he somehow gained access to Kaufman Hall and spent his time away from home there. The man who potentially could have been the dark figure in the dorm went back to the institution as he continued to run away. It's an interesting theory, but who knows if it's true. All I know is that Terry was lucky to get out of that dorm as fast as he did. This happened a good few years ago. I was in my early 20s, single and living by myself. Most of my family lived about a 4-hour drive away from me. I was working for a small call center that provided, amongst other things, phone service for a 24-hour plumbing company, so they needed someone on the line at all times. My shift ran from 8 p.m. to whenever my boss showed up to pick up the line, which was usually 6 a.m. I worked in a building that housed several businesses of the same sort, call center work mostly, though we were the only one that had 24-hour service. Because of budget cuts, I was always the only operator on my floor. The only people in the building at night were myself and the security guard, who came by to do his rounds twice a night. Now, because the line had to be on 24/7, I was never allowed to disconnect while I was there. I ran to and from the bathroom, ate meals sitting in front of the computer, and every once in a while sneaked a cigarette at the window within sight of the screen. Only the light above my computer was on. Everything else was turned off when everyone went away at 10 p.m, so I was left in half darkness beneath the spotlight. I desperately needed that job to support myself, so despite the awful conditions, I kept repeating that it wasn't so bad. Things were usually quiet after 10 p.m. I could use the extra hours on my paycheck and didn't even need a second job. I did a lot of reading and even considered going back to school because, if nothing else, the night shift would afford me plenty of time to study. So one night at around 2 a.m. or so, I got a call. I introduced myself as I always did. "Hi, you're speaking to so-and-so. My name is Jill. How may I be of service to you?" The guy on the other side repeated my name and hung up. Working phone services on the night shift, you get used to a lot of weird stuff, so I shrugged it off and went back to my book. Then he called again and asked if he was speaking to Jill. I said yes, repeated the name of the company, and asked how I may be of service. He hung up. The third time around he asks if this is Jill on the phone, and I ask to whom I'm speaking. He hangs up again. The next time he calls, he's breathing hard on the phone, and tells me to talk to him and he's not gonna hurt me. I jot down his phone number and I start hanging up whenever his call pops up, which was for the better part of an hour. This went on for months. When he realized I was hanging up every single time I saw the number, he began calling from a restricted number, meaning I never knew if it was a legit call, and ended up answering. All the time, this guy kept saying he wanted me to talk to him, and that he's not going to hurt me. The one time I counted, I hung up on this guy over 200 times in one night. Every time he would call, I'd say the company name, and as soon as I heard him, I would hang up. I complained to my boss, and she did nothing. Instead, she laughed off the whole thing because this guy obviously didn't know where I was, and he was only a voice on a line, and I was perfectly safe. Sometime into this, I started talking to co-workers, and here's where it started getting really creepy. He never called on my days off. When someone else would be covering my shift, indeed at one point, I changed shifts with a co-worker to attend a wedding, and he didn't call that day. As time went by, I was getting pretty spooked by the whole situation, and the fact my boss did zero to try and stop this. My co-workers were sympathetic, and told me that if my boss did nothing, I should file a complaint myself. But I'm not sure I could, since this wasn't happening on my personal number. None of them could really walk me home, since I was the only operator in the night shift, and everyone else was gone by the time my boss arrived and I left the office. I got a little paranoid, because obviously this guy knew my schedule pretty well, and even if I changed shifts, he would only call if he knew I was on the line. It had to be someone who could see me. I started commuting, with my cell phone in hand at all times, with the emergency number dialed in. Sometimes I did the whole commute on the phone with friends or relatives to keep calm. Since it's illegal to carry pepper spray here, at one point I considered walking around with a box cutter in my purse. That's how afraid I was. One day before my shift started, I was at the entrance of the building smoking a cigarette before going up, and I see the security guard come by, the same fellow who usually did the night shift. This huge guy. I didn't really know him. I never spoke to him. I only said good morning or goodbye when I went by his desk, and whenever he came to my floor to do his rounds. I usually kept to myself and never really made small talk or anything. I just greeted him out of politeness. He greeted me back. He asked me for a light, and I gave him my lighter. And he told me he had been fired and he was going home. And he went on to tell me he always got the impression I was afraid of him, since I was never friendly or welcoming, and those were his exact words. He then told me he was never going to hurt me and just walked away. I lost every drop of blood I had in me. I went inside to tell my boss the whole thing and discovered the guy got fired for harassing women in other floors, going as far as to trying to corner someone in one of the elevators. The complaints piled up and he lost his job. Most of the time his shifts matched mine, so he would see me come in at 8 p.m. and left before I did. I asked my boss for that phone number again, to come forward on this guy, and I asked the security company if it was his number. She told me she threw it away. When I told her the whole story, she found it quite cute. That's the exact word she used. Then she asked me if I was sure it was him, because a voice on the phone is different and that perhaps I got it wrong. Those were her exact words again. Quality assurance told us, and again, that our every call was recorded, so I demanded recordings. That's when I found out that, again because of budget cuts and whatnot, the night shift was never recorded, so I had no evidence. Once the guy was fired, the call stopped. I didn't work there for much longer after that. I work the graveyard shift at the wonderful Wally World. This means I see all the weirdos, drunks, and druggies. But this takes the icing on the cake. I am a 20-year-old female. I am by no means a big girl, but I'm a loner, and most people leave me alone. Hence why I work third shift. This night started as your average night does. Go to work, get told what to do, and start on it. This particular night, I happened to be in the baby section. I keep to myself and power through stocking, listening to some sort of documentary as I do so. That's when I get stopped by a man. He was older, so I asked him if he needed any help. He informs me that he's looking for a baby monitor for his wife. He doesn't know anything about them though. I walk him over to where they are and start looking at them and comparing specs. I even pull up online reviews trying to help him make a decision. He finally decides he'll come back up with his wife. I give him the "have a nice day" and go to walk away. This is when it starts. This man decides now, at 1 a.m, that it is the perfect time, and that I am the perfect person to pour his life story to. He tells me about how he is from Florida, and came up here to live with his mother because she isn't doing well. He tells me exactly where he lives, and then it starts getting even more personal. He tells me about how he builds all these expensive bedroom sets and furniture sets, and how he's really good at it. So good, he used to have his own company. But before that he was a manager at some other company that his buddy owned. The whole reason he left was because his wife was cheating on him. He wasn't mad about it though. He was just mad that she hid it from him. At this point, his wife leaves him for this guy, and he starts dating a girl half his age. The entire time he feels like she is familiar, and has seen her before, but can never figure out from where. Well, he comes to find out that she was an adult movie star. She steals $1,000 from him and leaves. He ends it all by saying that he will never marry again. The conversation shifts again. He tells me about how he totaled his truck last week. It was raining and he was going too fast and slid off the road and hit a tree. He was really upset over it and didn't know what he was going to do or what kind of truck he was going to get. His truck was his baby. and now he will probably get some cheap thing, since he keeps wrecking his vehicles. He makes it very clear that he doesn't want something cheap because he's broke. Money isn't an issue for him, he just doesn't want to spend money. At this point, I want to point out I have done nothing to initiate this conversation, and have not led to it at all. I have said maybe 3 words after I told him goodbye, and he keeps going on, even though I've added no commentary to the story. He also keeps edging closer and trying to touch me, which causes me to back up every few minutes and look nervously to my right where the doors to our back room are, and I keep seeing people walking in and out of it, hoping to catch somebody's eye, and they help me. Of course, nobody stops. My manager even sees this guy, and they don't stop either. At this point is where things start to get weird. He tells me he has cancer, but it isn't serious and he's not worried about it. He's more worried because his mum has cancer, and he doesn't want anything to happen to her because he's a mummy's boy, and he'd never had to pay for anything his entire life. He tells me that he was just arrested last month because his aunt set him up. She puts pills that weren't his into his truck, and had him set up so he couldn't claim inheritance money. He then informs me that this isn't the only time he's been locked up. He spent 35 years in prison because of money stuff. At this point, I've been standing here for 45 minutes to an hour, and my friends are heading to lunch at this point to stop and grab me. As soon as he sees these 2 guys walking up, he instantly makes an excuse to leave. Once he's gone, I start to realize a few things. This man said he was 50. He went to prison for 35 years. That would mean he was locked up at 15 and just got out, making everything else he said next to impossible. Not only that, but he wasn't even married and didn't have kids. That's what freaked me out. I'm pretty sure he was as high as a kite as well. I hope I never see this man again. And now, if I'm late to lunch break, I've informed to people to make sure I'm okay, just in case he comes back to look for me again. I'm a 23-year-old guy from the southern US. This happened while I was a night shift cashier at a rundown gas station at the end of summer in 2013, and I had just turned 19. The city I live in has about 10,000 people in it, so it's not a big place. I've lived here for most of my life. It's a decent place to raise a family, and pretty much the most boring place in the world, but the kind of place where, in the bad areas, bums, junkies and drunks run rampant. The gas station is in this kind of area. In my first week of working there, it became apparent that the few people I worked with were unreliable, and would seemingly quit out of nowhere. I quickly understood why. In the first 5 days alone, I ran off a woman trying to do heroin in the bathroom. I ran off some creep trying to pick up 2 13-year-olds, and I had more than a few detailed empty threats thrown my way by a couple of drunks that were on the no-sell list, which I would just laugh off. With that being said, I had grown accustomed to the type of dumbasses that shopped there from time to time. I got plenty used to it. After about a month of working there, and being the only employee worth their salt, I'd had to work on my own every now and then. I thought nothing of it really. It wasn't that bad. The store stayed empty for the most part. One particularly slow fall night, I noticed the silhouette of a tall, skinny man walking towards the store in the distance. I couldn't make out his features until he got closer. He was in his early 30s, unshaven, with stringy dark hair, a filthy grey hoodie, No shirt, black sweatpants, and unlaced boots. This guy gave me the chills. As he walked in the door next to the register, he silently glanced at me with a cold, dead, emotionless expression. Then quickly, he stared at the floor, shuffling along, browsing the 3 small aisles of snacks and cheap car accessories, and glancing up at me every few seconds. All in all, he stumbled around for 2 to 3 minutes, his hands deep in his hoodie pockets the entire time he was in the building. Then he quickly hurried out the side door and was gone. I assumed he'd stolen something to eat, and at that point I really didn't care. The guy was obviously high, and I wasn't about to get stabbed over a Twinkie. Not to mention that my manager had turned into a real arsehat, and I had thought of quitting, so take 2 more of them while you're at it. The very next day, I was scheduled on the 3 to 11 shift. The afternoon went surprisingly peacefully. A few old people, a couple of cute girls, and a guy in a suit in a hurry. Not many people came in that evening either, which wasn't a shocker, as it was getting pretty late, and I sure wasn't complaining. Then at around 10, once again, the only one in the store, I see the familiar tall, skinny silhouette out in the distance. The man from the previous day had come walking down the street, hand shoved in his pocket like he had a gun, heading towards the entrance. The bell on the door was the only sound in an otherwise completely silenced moment. For a few seconds he gave me that same dead stare, seemingly sizing me up, then went right back to business, browsing the aisles and glancing up at me. By this point, my adrenaline is pumping. I'm alone, and I'm wondering if he's armed, and what I'm going to do if he tries something. A few minutes later, he comes up to the counter, holding a small bottle of water and $2 between the fingers of his same hand, just staring at me. His right hand never left his hoodie pocket. I rang him up silently and handed him his change. He stood there for about 10 seconds staring at me. Then, in a very foreboding deep voice, says, "You need to call the police." My heart sank. "Excuse me?" "You need to call the police." Then, as quickly as he finished repeating himself, he walked out of the door and disappeared. Needless to say, I took that advice very quickly. I locked all the doors, went to the back, and called the police. A squad car eventually pulled up, and I gave my statement and went home. I quit not long after that, having finally had enough of my manager and all the crap that came along with that job. I think about those 2 nights a lot. I never heard from the police again, and I've never seen that man again, which is strange in a town where you recognize every face. The only conclusion I can come to is that he might have known someone that was planning something that night, and the cops scared them off. There was nobody around outside in the pitch black, and the store was completely empty except for me. What if he hadn't done what he did? Would someone have shoved a gun in my face over the money in the register? Or was someone simply looking for a life to take? Either way, moral of the story, don't judge a book by its cover. I work as a nurse in a home for the elderly. I've been doing this job for about 12 years now, and over time, death becomes something normal. As hard as it sounds, I'm kind of used to it. It's not nice, but it's part of the job, and I've never felt scared or uncomfortable to be around a dead body. After 6 years, I was tired of working in the casualty unit of the local hospital, and changed over to my current position of night shift, and the darkness isn't a problem for me either. But that changed. Last summer, one of the residents died. I never liked that man. He was a drunk and quite abusive against his wife, who was also a former resident there. When he moved in, he even had a dog, and often refused to feed the poor thing and kicked it until we took it away from him. To be honest, I was glad he was gone. At the time, I worked with someone who was a pain in the neck sometimes, and I faked to be really busy during the night, but was actually watching YouTube on a different floor. The whole time I had that eerie feeling that someone was behind me, but I thought it was just me, until I heard a loud noise in the hallway behind me. I turned around and saw one of the big laundry carts lying on the floor, with one of the little wheels still spinning. These things are quite heavy, and normally they can't just flip around, but some kind of extrusion kicked in, and I never really thought about it. I just picked up the cart and moved on with my shift, but I had enough of being alone and joined my co-worker. Nothing else happened that night. The next day, another co-worker of mine, who was my best friend, began acting strange. Everyone was quite nervous and clingy. Most people at my workspace don't like me that much, and some even ignore me. But somehow we spent some nice time together this evening, and they looked like they didn't want to be alone for some reason. Eventually we managed to get the evening shift out of the house, and my friend Maria and I prepared some nice coffee and a good talk. It began slowly, with some quiet noises, like someone was knocking on a wall or door. At first we ignored it because it soon became so frequent, we had to investigate the noise. We walked around the whole building, but it seemed like the noise was switching around. We heard it in a room on the first floor, but while we approached it, it suddenly seemed to be on the second floor and so on. At this stage we joked about rats in the walls, trying to calm us down, but we both knew this wasn't a normal night. While on our little hiking tour, one of the residents approached us, complaining about the little man in his room. This was a common thing in a home. We have a lot of people with dementia, and they wander around sometimes, but we both knew the usual suspects were sleeping. As you can guess, the room was empty. The man had a nightmare, and that's it. But over the next hours, people called us because of a little man in their rooms. We got really scared. We even grabbed a kitchen knife and carried it around for safety. And at 1 a.m. the noise changed. We heard footsteps quite clearly, and Marie freaked out a bit. Even now I refused to accept something paranormal was going on, and approached the noise, but I think this made it even worse. The steps became louder and more pronounced, until they stopped, only to start somewhere else. It sounded violent in some way, like someone rushes at you in anger. We heard more and more noises, loud banging, steps, and even doors opening. We even found doors open we definitely closed, and lights turned on that were off when we left the room. We were pretty close to call the police a few times, but who would believe a story like this? Somehow we got our shift done, and we told everything we experienced during the night shift to the morning shift. Strangely, no one laughed at us. It turned out they had experienced the same thing the day before. Marie and I drove home, and after a nap, she called our boss. At the time Marie called, the entire morning shift refused to work. They'd heard the noise too, and most horrified, they washed one of the residents shortly after, and found a foot-shaped mark on her chest, like someone had stepped on it with force. Marie and our boss then called a mental healer, who works at the hospital unpaid once a week. He claims to talk with spirits, and the residents can call him up if they want to.
and something spiritual, like the fear of death or the afterlife or something. He and Marie went to the dead man's room and stayed there for about an hour. She never told me what they did, but in some way, whatever it was helped. The next day, we had a normal shift, and since then nothing happened. I don't think about this night very often, but since then 2 other people have died in my shift. I'm not scared about it, and I can do my best as usual. But from time to time, I just stop and think for a moment, and hope it never happens to me again. I work the night shift at a motel in a fairly small city in Oklahoma. We have a Walmart and a small college about 10 minutes away, so it's not tiny or anything. It's small enough that there's usually no reason to be creeped out about anyone you encounter here. So here I am, getting my laptop situated for the next 8 boring hours, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And this 60 to 65-year-old lanky guy comes in, and he says he's the new employee, and that I'm supposed to train him tonight. I remembered that I was training someone, and mostly just think, shit, now I can't binge watch Buffy like I'd planned. He comes around to the desk, and I start giving him the basic rundown of the job. Do literally nothing besides check people in, and print some papers out for the night audit team later in the night. He comes off as generally nice, could hold a conversation, but kind of slow, almost slow enough to call him dumb. But I just assumed he's the type of person that needs to do things a few times before getting the hang of it. I should mention that he had worked another shift previously, and my co-worker said he wasn't the smartest person in the world, but figured he'd work it out in the long run. After a while of bullshitting, joking around and watching Modern Family, and just getting to know each other, he asks if I'm married or not, to which I say no. He tells me he recently got a divorce, and it pretty much destroyed his life, hence the motel job. Around 2:30, he tells me he forgot his heart medication, and asks if he can run home to get it, about a 5 to 10 minute drive away. I told him that it wouldn't be a problem, and I figured since he was old and staying up until 7 in the morning, he might actually need that medication. Around 3 a.m, he comes back, and immediately looks different. One of his eyes just won't open. He's squinting with his eye the entire time, and trying very hard to open it. The first thing he asks was, "You got any rooms?" I think he's joking, so I tried to laugh off his extremely unfunny joke. He comes around and sits next to me, and we decide to watch another episode of Modern Family. Shortly into the episode, he starts talking about sex, and asking me weird questions like, "Do you have sex? Regularly?" At this point, I should give you a little description of myself. I'm a 23-year-old ginger, chubby, gay guy. I'm pretty much one of the least attractive people you could ask for. Needless to say, I wasn't expecting what came next. "With whom do you have sex?" he asked. My usual rule when someone asks me about my sexuality is to just be honest. But it being Hicktown and all, and trying to be discreet, I say, with friends. He then asked if I were gay, but I said no. He kept going on about sex, and then tells me he likes guys. To which I reply, and still with no red flags popping up in my head, "Oh, hey, me too." At this point he's noticeably acting strange. Textbook drunk behavior, like slouching, and just freezing in that position for an extended period of time, losing focus and looking like he just needs to take a nap. Again, no red flags pop up because I think he's just having some sort of reaction to his medicine. I ask him if he's okay, and he says that he's not feeling well, and that he is indeed having a strange reaction to the medicine. I ask him if I should ask my managers to come pick him up, but he refuses. That's when I realize this shit's not right. But still, I want to just get through the shift, and we can get help in the morning. A few minutes later, I look over and he makes eye contact with me, and gives me a little nod as if to say, "Come here." I look back at my computer, and when I turn my head, he's just a little closer, and reaches his hand out, and then literally asks, "You wanna?" I'm just like, "No, sorry, I can't do that at work." He shuts up for a second, and then asks, "Why don't you?" I perk up. "What?" "You could flash me your ass or something." I'm still not fully recognizing here that this needs to stop, and I just flat out tell him, "No, you're clearly screwed on something. Let's just make it through the night, and we'll figure this out in the morning." He responds by rolling his chair over and touches my friggin' thigh. I pull away with a little laugh and say something like, "Look man, I don't want to call the manager, but I will. Stop." He looks a little shaken up and rolls back over, and about a minute later he does it again. Only this time, it was like he was trying to be sneaky about it. I stand up and tell him that I have to pee. In truth, I went to the back storage area, locked the door and called my manager, and told him the situation. Obviously, he says something to the effect of, "Oh shit, call the police." I'm not a physical specimen by any means, but I wasn't physically intimidated him by one bit. I think that's what made me so lax about it. So I called the police and they said they'd be right over, although they sounded super confused. I made my way back out to the desk to check on him, and he's gone. I looked everywhere on the first floor, but he was nowhere to be found. Then I looked outside the glass door. In the dark, I couldn't tell who it was, but someone was on all fours in the parking lot. I walked out to find him weeping and holding his broken glasses, and there was a huge blood spatter right in front of him. I don't know exactly how it happened, but I assumed he simply slipped or passed out and fell flat on his face on the concrete. His face was all bloodied up, and he clearly couldn't function. So I helped him up, walked him to the couch in the lobby, cleaned him off with a wet rag, and sat him down. He kept asking me for a room, but after a few times I said, "Sure, I'll get you a room in a few minutes." The cops showed up about 5 minutes later, questioned him and took him to jail for the night. They didn't tell me much, but from what I could gather they had apparently had to deal with this guy multiple times, and he clearly had some issues. And then it was over. I told all of my friends, family and co-workers the next day, and they all seemed really sketched out. But to me, it was just some creepy old gay dude. He lived in denial for so long that something snapped, and he didn't know how to live with himself. I never felt threatened during the night. It was just a profoundly weird experience. Of course, had I been a girl or smaller guy, I might have freaked out a little bit harder.
I have worked mostly night audit the entire time that I have worked at my hotel. So one night, I come in, and this old Vietnam vet that has been staying with us on and off over the past few years was at the desk chatting up my co-worker. When she left him, and I got to bullshit and got him on the topic of those ghost shows that they show on the Travel Channel. I told him I believe There are probably paranormal things in this world, but I believe these shows are all lies. So eventually he goes upstairs, and I go back into the office. Here is where it gets weird. In the back office, we have a desk that is connected to the wall, with the security monitor and DVR on the right-hand side of the chair. We have 8 cameras in total that cover the entrances, guest computer, breakfast area, and the housekeeping laundry room. The laundry room that night had the lights turned off and the infrared sensors turned on. So I sit down at the desk and prop my phone up against the wall to watch some YouTube. Right as I set my phone down, I see a white object skirt the lower left-hand corner of the housekeeping/laundry room camera. Now remember, I had just got done talking with a guest about paranormal stuff, and my heart was instantly racing. So I jump up, leaving my phone at the desk, and rush across the hall into the laundry room. I fling that door open and hit the lights and half step into the room. I start yelling into the room, "Who the hell's in here?" I look around while keeping one hand on the door and not wanting to venture too far into the room. So I yell a few more times, "Who's in the room?" I wait and receive no answer. No one ever answered, but I got this funny feeling that someone was behind the door. And I kid you not, like straight out of the movies, I look behind the door, and there is this tall lanky dude standing behind it, trying his damn hardest to impersonate the wall. I start yelling at him, "Who the hell are you and how the hell did you get in here?" He just stares at me at first, and after yelling at him a few more times, he tells me he was just trying to get out of the cold. It was October or November, but not cold outside. So I told him I didn't give a crap and demanded to know how he got in. He said that he came through the south entrance, so I told him to get the hell out of here. He asks which way he should go, and I told him the same way he got in. So he starts down the hall towards the south entrance, and when we get there, sure enough, the damn door is propped open with a small rock, and I told him to get out and kicked the rock away. So I get him out and go back and get my cell phone and call my general manager. She told me to check all the entrances, including the guest laundry. I double-checked everything and told her it was good. And since he was already gone, we didn't call the cops. Now originally, I thought the guy got in the way he said he did, through the south entrance, and had snuck into the laundry room before I saw him on the camera, and I busted him coming back out. Turns out that was wrong. The next day, the maintenance guy got to work and noticed a bunch of his tools were missing. Turns out the guy had jimmied the outside door to the sprinkler room, which serves as the maintenance office, and came into the building that way. The sprinkler room is connected to the housekeeping/laundry room, so I actually caught this guy coming further into the building, but after he had already rummaged through the sprinkler room and stolen tools. We also discovered that day the window to the guest laundry room, which is on the south end of the building near the door, that was propped open, was broken, and the screen was halfway pulled out. But due to a robbery earlier in the same year, we had barred the windows so that we're only open an inch or so. We figured he came back after I chased him out, and tried to get in that way, but couldn't because the window wouldn't open all the way, and I had checked the guest laundry room when I was on the phone with my general manager, but because the window wasn't busted when I checked it, I hadn't noticed the screen was pried halfway off. Needless to say, I am wary about telling ghost stories at work anymore, because this was the second time I had been talking about something spooky, and then something happens later that night. I'm also super paranoid about having the lights to the housekeeping/laundry room off anymore.
I work the night shift at a hotel, so I've had tons of weirdos come through, but this is the most recent. Everything started off normally. Usually once I click in at 11 PM, I can just sit at the desk and only see a few people. I'm a loner, and I prefer it this way. At 2:30 in the morning, a guy in his 30s comes down and stands in front of me at the desk. I've worked this job for 5 years, so I can pick out the weirdos pretty well, and I knew right away something was off about him. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, so I asked, "Can I help you?" He mumbles something. All that I can make out is the word coffee. I tell him that there's fresh coffee available in the breakfast area behind him. He turns, then looks back at me confused. "Do you have some coffee I can take to my room?" My first thought is that this guy is drunk as hell, and I told him he could take a cup of the already made coffee, or I could give him a few packs to take. He wanted the packs, so I grabbed a few and handed them to him, hoping that that's all he wanted and I could resume watching TV. No such luck. He kept standing in front of me, looking at the packets of coffee, confused. I'd had enough of drunk guy, so I walk over to the other side of the desk and stare at the TV, ignoring him. After a few minutes, he wandered into the breakfast area and stares at the pots of coffee. Then he wanders over to the fruit, the cereal, yogurt, and back. He's just staring at everything and walking in slow circles. After a while of that, he stops looking at the food and looks at the ground, then starts muttering to himself as he walks in circles. Now he is officially freaking me out. He's at least 6 inches taller than me and 50 pounds heavier, and I'm the only one on shift. I start thinking of escape options, like locking myself in the laundry room, running to the gas station next door, as I've had to do it a few times where things have gotten really bad, so I try to plan ahead when people give me bad vibes. About 15 minutes after, he starts walking in circles, and he heads down the hall, still muttering. I relax, happy he's gone to bed to pass out, and I'll have the lobby to myself again. Probably 5 minutes later, I glance out the front doors and he's right there staring at me, smoking a cigarette, and talking to himself. I'm starting to think he's high, and that scares me enough to grab a pair of scissors when he's not looking and hold them by my side. I begin contemplating calling the police, but what for? He hasn't done anything yet. So I wait it out, in the hopes that he goes to bed soon, since it was after 3 AM. For the next half hour, he walks up and down the hall, through the lobby, and outside, then comes back in through the back door and loops around again. The third time he walks by me, still talking, I was terrified, and was on the verge of saying, "Screw it, I'm calling 911 anyway just to have someone else there with me." Just then an old woman walks up to the desk and asks me to call her a cab. She has no idea how happy I am to see her. I call for her and start chatting her up, which is very unusual for me, just to keep her in the lobby. The weirdo comes around the corner for the 4th time, and the old woman tells him to pack his stuff. They're leaving, because he woke her up and she couldn't go back to sleep. Apparently this old lady is the weird guy's mum, and I feel much better knowing he was going to leave as soon as the cab got there. As soon as she told him to pack his stuff, he got angry. He didn't want to leave. He told her to go back to bed, but she was adamant, and after they argued for a bit, which was awkward for me just sitting there watching, he goes upstairs to pack. She explained to me that she could tell he was getting agitated and that it was time to take him home. I spoke to her for a while, and she opened up to me that her son is schizophrenic, and she's the only one who can take care of him. She told me she just wished someone would take him for just 6 months, like a hospital, to get him on meds and into a good routine. I felt so awful for her. She seemed so tired and hopeless. I have mental issues myself, so I could relate to the struggle. All of a sudden, the weird guy comes running out demanding to stay, and they argue again. Except this time he sees me watching and focuses on me, storming up to the desk and screaming, "She's gonna call the cops, I didn't do anything." Loads of horrible things followed. I just stood there stunned. I held the scissors up to defend myself, and his mum screamed, "Stop! Do you hear what you're saying to her?" And he calmed down just as fast as he snapped. The cab pulled up, and as much as I felt for his mum, I was happy to see them pull away. I'd rather not meet him ever again. I worked as a night auditor for a New Brampton in one of the safest areas near me for a little over 2 years now. It's got direct access to 2 main highways. I've had my fair share of creepy guests and weirdos, but most were easy check-ins and fixes, and they were on their way. However, last night changed everything. As safe as my property is, we do have a shady $40 a night motel on either side of our building. There's been some stuff that's gone down at both places, and occasionally their guests try to sneak into our hotel for a free breakfast. I have had on 2 occasions seen the police raid both hotels and spend all night searching for people who ran and collecting evidence, I presume. It's been a while since I've had such entertainment though. So anyway, it's about 2:30 AM and I'm getting ready to run my night audit. My doors are always locked, and this guy who is dirty, but in a construction worker kind of way, walks up. We have plenty of construction workers stay here, as we aren't far from their site, and we're rated number 1 in the area. So I open the door for him and ask if he needs a room before I run the audit. He grins at me, but it's anything but a warm welcome. It looks fake and almost threatening. He looks at me for a second and I say, "I have a guest in room 114. He looks at me for a second and says, "I have a guest in room 114. His wording caught me off guard. Not many say they have a guest in a room. It's usually, "I'm here for la la la," or "I'm meeting blah blah blah." The second issue is that we don't have a room 114, and neither do any of the same brand names in my area. I've been to all the intermediate ones, so I inform him that we don't have that room. He looks at me for a second and says, "Ah, shucks, guess I got stood up," giggles and walks out the door. Thinking this is very odd, but whatever, I go back to running the audit. As I'm finishing up, the phone rings. A guy starts chuckling and says that there's a car in your parking lot with its lights on. And oh, by the way, I'm the guy that just got stood up. Now 1, it's been half hour since he walked out the door. And why is he still in the parking lot? And 2, nobody has come or gone since him. And there were no lights on in the parking lot when he arrived. 3, why do I need to know that you're the guy that got stood up? I brush it off as odd, but my gut is telling me that something strange is afoot. I wait about 5 minutes, and then walk around the front of the building from the inside, and see no cars in my parking lot with lights on. It's not very well lit, so it would be easy to spot. I go back to the front desk, and wait for the audit team to finish up, so that I can get ready to start breakfast, and the phone rings again. I pick it up, and it's Creepy Guy telling me yet again that there are lights on in the parking lot. It's been at least another 20 minutes since his previous call. So again, why would he still be in my parking lot? I feel like I may have missed something between the windows, so I go to my locker door, peek my head out really quick,
do a swift scan of the lot, and my eye catches someone standing in the corner. It's Creepy Guy, and he's watching me. There's also no car with its lights on. I run back inside, double check that the doors are locked, and that's when I start to feel this sense of panic that something really bad is about to happen. I have never felt this feeling while on my shift, and only once before in my life, and let's just say I have physical scars from when that happened last time. I get back out to the front desk, and I call the local police department, explain the situation to dispatch, and ask if it's ever happened before. I tell them no, but also inform them that I'm the only employee on the property, and would like for them to scan the parking lot, and to check in with me if possible. The police pulls up, and wants to get a description from me before searching the area. Well, as he's getting out of the car, he notices movement. The Creepy Guy took off. The cop walks in, a little nervous, and tells me what he'd just seen while using his radio for calling assistance. 3 more show up, and they discuss it, search my parking lot and the 2 neighboring parking lots, and they seem to come up with nothing, but stick around to patrol the parking lot until the sun came up. Police has stopped by only once since my shift started tonight to check in with me, and said that they would be in my area if I needed anything. While here, they told me that a total of 3 guys fled the parking lot from different directions last night. He believed the Creepy Guy was trying to lure me in there, away from the doors, so I would end up trapped between the 3 of them. He didn't go much further as to what could have happened from there, and I honestly don't want to dwell on it. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to share it. It was 2016, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me the job. For a few days I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 PM to 7 AM shift. Nothing exciting, checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property, and large glass windows all around the office building, with a glass door. There was no night windows like most motels have. It was fairly eerie in the night, at about 1 AM. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork, when a man walks in, and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually if someone is sketchy, my boss told me to lie and say no, but he seemed normal. Without hesitation I said, "Yes, of course, just for one," and he replies yes. So I begin creating the reservation on the computer, when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises, as if he's being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key, and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happened next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I reply, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger.
I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he was the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep. I just needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Don't you like me?" Me being an idiot, and not standing my ground, and calling the police when I feel scared, I decided to take the situation on alone, and I replied, "I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over, with no answer, and decide to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man wasn't there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry, let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife as I was holding it. I begin to walk outside, and he seems insistent to walk behind me. We begin making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down, and I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going into someone else's room and trying to open the door. I felt bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye out and an ear out. The next night the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work the night shift there for the next year. There were many other strange encounters, but strange man, please, let's not meet. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police.
The first thing happened when I was 18. My 14-year-old sister and I walked into the kitchen after ballet class. We were home alone and talking about what to make for dinner. All of a sudden, we hear a little girl laughing. It sounded like it was coming from just out of sight in the hallway upstairs. We both stopped mid-conversation and stared at the hallway. My sister, still staring at the hallway, said, "Did you hear the laugh?" I said yes, and she jumped into action, grabbing a large knife from the drawer. I rolled my eyes, but grabbed one as well and followed her upstairs. There was no one up there. No TVs were on, and no windows were open. We've had no other experiences in our house to date. This is now the second story. A few years ago, I used to work at a rehab center. I did the graveyard shift and had to go do 3 bed checks per hour to make sure all the patients were in bed. This was a really cool rehab program where the kids lived with the parents while they were there, and these people worked on getting clean and being a better parent. The only thing I hated about the job was that the houses they lived in were super old and really creepy, and I had to navigate my way through with just a flashlight. As a result, I left many lights that wouldn't disturb anyone on, and spent more time than I should have in the well-lit office.
One of my last nights there, I was in the office with my feet up on the desk. The light from the living room lit up on the wall in front of the office, and just then I heard what sounded like children playing in the next room. As the sound moves closer to the office, I can see what looks like the shadow of a little girl in a dress being cast on the wall from the light of the living room. I can hear her humming and talking to herself. When kids are out of bed, I was supposed to take them back to their parents, wake the parents up, and make them put them into bed. I heaved my feet on the desk, and they made a loud slap as they hit the floor. I saw the shadow freeze and then scurry away. Now it took me probably 5 seconds to cross the office and get to the living room, and by the time I got there it was empty. None of the toys had been disturbed. The only place this little girl could have gone from there was over a baby gate, down a short hall, and then down along a creaky flight of stairs. I quickly ran to the stairs and looked down. For good measure, I went and checked on all the kids in the house, and they were out. The next morning, one of the dads told me about the creepy paranormal stuff he'd seen in the house, and that I was lucky to have not seen one of those. I was glad I only had 2 night shifts left after that night. This third story actually happened this year, the day before Halloween. I had a friend in from out of town, and we decided to take him on a ghost tour in downtown Salt Lake City. I had been on another tour by the same company, and it had been educational and scary. They hand out dowsing rods and EMF detectors, load everyone up on a bus, and take you around to various alleged haunted locations, and tell you about the activity claims. In the middle of the downtown tour we took our friends on, we went to the Holiday Inn Express. Yes, our tour guide made the joke about the not creepy name as well. In the 70s, the wife of a cult leader after her husband's death took her 7 children up to a balcony and encouraged them to jump. The ones who did not want to jump were thrown off. She jumped after they all fell. One girl survived, and I believe that she's still alive today. For the tour, we stood on the sidewalk where the children landed and looked up at the balcony. Now I get dizzy upon standing quite frequently, and we had been on and off the bus for a good 5 minutes before, and then I had this experience, standing there looking up. My heart broke for those children. All of a sudden I got the most extreme sense of vertigo, and my heart started pounding. I was terrified. I have never been that dizzy in my life. I almost had to sit on the sidewalk. For just a moment, I felt like I was falling. I could feel the wind on my face, just as I was about to sit down, and then it abruptly ended, and I felt completely fine. The tour guide started leading us back to the bus. My boyfriend had been standing in the road behind me during this whole thing, and he said the EMF had all of a sudden started going crazy, and then it stopped. I didn't see it, but his description seemed to coincide with my experience. It did not feel like I was attacked by a malicious spirit. It felt like I connected with the spirit of a sweet, scared little girl. It was 2016, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job, and for a few days I did training with the owner in the mornings. For the 2 nights Michael trained me, our job was the 11 PM to 7 AM shift. Nothing exciting, checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property, and a large glass window all around the office building with a glass door. There was a no nights window, like most motels have. It was about 1 AM. Fairly early into the night, and I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment, and without hesitation I said, "Yes, of course. Just for one?" "Yes," he replies. So I begin creating the reservation on the computer, when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he's surrounded by flies. I try to ignore this. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business, so I try to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key, and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can understand all my reactions to what happened next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through it and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" My only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I'd tried texting Michael because he was the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep, but I just needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when you're working at night, and I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, decided to take this situation on alone. "I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over, but there's no answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man wasn't there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself, angrily saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police. He comes out and I say, "Your key was broken, I'm sorry, let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long-sleeved sweater, so my arms were down and able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. He began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continually looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going into someone else's room and trying to open the door. I felt bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. Over the next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. So, strange man, let's never meet again. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police. This happened around June last year. I had been working at this grocery shop for over a year as a cashier, and became kind of friends with a few of the people I worked with. I was often put on the night shift, finishing at 11 PM if I remember correctly. So it was usually me, another cashier, and about 5 night fill people who restock shelves and whatnot. On this night, one of the night fill people working was Patrick, a charismatic early 20s student who was super nice to everyone in the store and sometimes hung around the counter talking to me and the other cashiers for a bit when it wasn't too busy. Nothing strange about him. I actually liked it when he was working because time passed quicker and I actually had someone to talk to. Little did I know. At around 9 PM I went on my break. The office/break room was downstairs and the staff bathroom was next to it. While I was having a snack, Patrick came in and we had a short conversation. I think we were just talking about what we did outside of work and whatever. He left and after finishing what I was eating, I went to the bathroom. The staff bathroom was just a single room with no stalls, no lockers at the back where we put our things, a toilet next to them and a sink. As soon as I walked in, I noticed an open locker at the very bottom next to the toilet with a bunch of someone's things in it. I remember very clearly noticing it because I saw a pack of cigarettes and I really wanted to take one because I'm a smoker who wouldn't buy her own cigarettes at the time. I sat on the toilet to do my thing while I was still looking at the locker, and I noticed there was an iPhone face down propped at an angle with a jumper. An instant Kill Bill siren started going off in my head. I ignored it for a bit and just closed the locker door. I finished doing my thing and began pacing around the bathroom. I knew this was dodgy because firstly, why would anyone put their things in the bottom locker next to the toilet, which is probably the filthiest place to put them? Secondly, even though most people didn't have locks on their lockers, who would leave their locker wide open with their phone in plain sight? I kept thinking for a few minutes trying to figure out if I should pick up the phone and check out that it wasn't being recorded. And at the time I was thinking, but if I'm not, that would be so disrespectful. But I also didn't want to find out that I was in fact being recorded in the toilet. Finally, I snapped out of it and realized I had literally nothing to lose and grabbed the phone and checked. Sure enough, there it was. The moment I grabbed the phone and looked at the screen, a video stopped recording. In front of me was a home screen with all the usual iPhone apps, and amongst them was one called Hidden Camera or something along those lines. A photo of Patrick was in the background, and I absolutely lost my mind. I opened the app, and on there were many videos. I scrolled through it to find the most recent one and began watching it. The video starts with Patrick putting his phone down and propping it up on his jumper to make sure that the back camera is facing the toilet. At this point, I'm pretty sure I'm crying and shaking from how messed up this whole thing is. I then fast forward to the last few minutes, as it was around 10 to 15 minutes long. I see myself going into the bathroom, pulling my pants and underwear down, sitting down, and all the while looking at the locker, and then closing the locker door. This whole time, I was trying to convince myself this wasn't actually happening, but that was all the proof I needed. I sat on the toilet and kept crying, not knowing what to do. Then I started messaging my friend's group chat, obviously distressed and trying to explain as quickly as I could. I wasn't sure if this was something that required me calling the cops, but I think one of my friends finally told me to call them, so I did. I tried to explain what happened quietly. I was really scared that Patrick had figured out something was wrong in the toilet and was trying to get in, and was also scared that the cops wouldn't help me since I wasn't really in physical danger, even though this was definitely very illegal. I just felt violated, but like it was somehow my fault, like I was in the wrong for not having checked the phone in the first place. I was told to wait in the bathroom until the police came. I waited for about 40 minutes just crying and shaking, messaging my friends. I then heard a knock at the door, and it was the police. I let them in and they closed the door. Behind them was Patrick, looking like a scared dog. I told them what happened. They looked at the phone, gathered all the evidence, arrested Patrick, and took me to the police station to take my statement. I knew he had been released on bail until his court case, and he wasn't allowed near me or my workplace. But I was terrified that I would run into him and he would try to hurt me. But thankfully, it never happened. The police kept in contact with me and let me know that they had found hundreds of upskirtings and staff bathroom videos. Patrick was charged with several offenses and sentenced to 10 months in jail, and was later deported since he was here on a student visa. So anyway, today I'm happy to say, gross creep, we probably won't meet again. About 2 years ago, when I had first moved to the front desk after working in laundry, a rather strange man moved into our hotel. His name was Simon. He had recently gone through a divorce and had nowhere to live. He was one of those guests, you know the kind, that has to talk to you about everything and tells you their life story at the drop of a hat. Now, during my second shift working alone, he checked in. Or should I say he wanted to move in his stuff, but not himself, for a discounted rate. He already had worked out a really cheap rate with the director of sales, and Simon still wanted a discounted rate on top of that for putting his stuff in the room. He's still using the room, so it still counts as rented, but you know guests don't see it that way. I got permission from our director of sales to give him a discount, and he started moving in his stuff. He needed help with everything, and I was the only staff member on property, so of course I had to help him. He thanked me for my help, but instead of giving me a tip or anything, he gives me a flashlight with his failed business name on it. Great, thank you so much, Simon. Now back then I used to only work first shift, so I'd always see Simon downstairs for breakfast. He told me all about himself, including about his heart. There was something wrong with it. One day the second shift even had to call an ambulance for him. He had a heart attack. He came back and seemed fine. I kept seeing him drinking and smoking and such. I warned him gently that he shouldn't be doing that. He seemed to think it would be fine though. I frowned and hoped he'd be okay. He told me they had messed up the surgery on his heart, and the next day he'd be going back to the hospital for surgery again. He told me about how he was suing the hospital, and I wished him luck, and he went back to his room. The next morning I didn't see Simon come down for breakfast. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then someone came in asking for him. The really strange thing was that there was another man at the hotel at the time with the exact same name. He was in the room right across the hall from the other Simon, so I called him first and told him his friend was looking for him. He had no idea what I was talking about, so I called the other Simon, but there was no answer. Simon's friend told me he hadn't been able to get a hold of him since yesterday afternoon, and he needed to get to the hospital for his surgery. He wanted a key to his room. I couldn't give him one, since his name wasn't on the reservation. I told him to wait in the lobby while I went to check on him. I felt very nervous all of a sudden. I went up to his room and started knocking and calling his name. To no answer. I tried to open the door, but the latch was on. I went and got the maintenance man to help me break open the door. When we got the door open, The maintenance man was too nervous to go into the room, so I went in, calling his name with increasing panic. He was lying on his bed, not moving. I started calling his name again, but there was still no answer. I felt so scared then that I called 911, and they told me to check to see if he was still breathing. He was not. But one quick touch told me everything I needed to know. He was cold as ice. Simon was dead. It was really terrifying to me at the time, but I tried to keep calm. The doctors arrived and tried to revive him, but of course it was far too late for that. Instead, they called a body bag. Simon's friend called his family to let them know. Simon's brother came by later that day to clean up his room, and housekeeping cleaned up later on, and found some really strange things in his room, such as voodoo dolls. He was a really strange guy. Since then, I've always tried to rent out that room last. It's kind of spooky to go in there. The lights always seem to flicker, despite maintenance checking on them several times. Perhaps I'm just being superstitious, but it's freaky. To this day, it's one of the worst things that's ever happened while I've been working here.
I worked graveyard shift for a long time. One night about 25 years ago, I had caught up with my night's work, but was unable to back up the work I'd done. I decided to clock out and drive to Walmart to buy a box of new discs and leave the receipt for our bookkeeper so that she could reimburse me. A few days after this incident, we learned that our computer had a virus that was corrupting the floppy disks we were using. So, you get the picture. Floppy disks for backup, no cell phones for most of us. It was a primitive time. I arrived at Walmart at 3 a.m, went in, found the discs, and decided to visit the toy department. It was early November, and I wanted to get Christmas gift ideas for my son, as well as several nieces and nephews. While I browsed, I felt someone watching me. I looked around, and there were 3 men nearby, and all were staring at me. I looked back at them for long enough to fix their appearances in my mind, and went on to continue looking at toys. I was in no hurry. I was off the clock and wouldn't need much time to back up my work after I returned to the office, so I continued to look around, even strolled through houseware for a few minutes. Every time I looked over my shoulder, those 3 guys were close and watching me. After the second time, alarms were sounding in my head. They were repellent looking, with pasty pale faces as if they spent all their time indoors eating junk food, and their eyes were cold and hard. What disturbed me most was the way that they were dressed, much too warmly for the weather that night. Even though it was November, it was about 55 Fahrenheit outside. I was perfectly comfortable in a jean jacket. These guys were in heavy coats, suitable for sub-freezing temperatures. And they had them buttoned to their necks inside the store. The only reason I could think of for that was that they were hiding weapons beneath those coats. I finally headed towards the cash registers, thinking that if no one else was leaving the store when I did, I would ask the cashier to call security and request an escort to my vehicle. As I reached the register, I saw my stalkers standing just inside the doors. They muttered amongst themselves for a moment, and then they exited the store. As I was paying, a man and woman lined up behind me. I'd seen them shortly before I neared the register, and they didn't seem to be paying attention to me. I moved to the area between the registers and the door, and stood waiting for the couple, fiddling with my buttons and blowing my nose. When they moved towards the doors, so did I.
just staying a few steps ahead of them. I had parked not far outside, and I reached my vehicle quickly. The stalkers were sitting in a car that was parked nose to nose with my pickup truck. I hopped in, locked the doors, and sat back and stared at them. The couple I had used as my unwitting escorts walked past me and the stalkers and got into their car a few spaces away. They left, and after a minute or two, the stalker driver said something to the others, started the engine, and pulled away. I watched as they slowly left the parking lot, then ascended the nearby interstate highway overpass and took the entrance ramp. Only then did I start my engine. I took my time looking around as the engine warmed. I continued along the street for a few miles past the interstate, then pulled into a dark lot behind a strip mall, turned off my lights and engine, and waited, watching the few vehicles that passed. I wanted to be certain that I would not lead these guys to my office building, which was isolated, and at this hour usually deserted except for me. After my pulse slowed down to normal, I restarted the truck and returned to work. I'm a female, but I'm almost 6 foot tall and weigh 175 pounds. I know that my size has protected me from a lot of mayhem over the years. I was also armed that night. I carried a loaded Smith & Wesson .357 revolver, as well as a speed loader, which is like an extra cylinder full of bullets. Still, I probably would have been no match for 3 determined assailants. This experience cured me of my nonchalance about running errands in the wee hours, and validated my conviction that any time I get the feeling someone's eyes are crawling over me, it's wise to look around and find the reason. About 3 months later, my husband and I were watching the local evening news, and they showed photos of 2 of the stalkers. They were wanted for armed robbery. This happened when I was about 16 or 17 years old, back when I lived with my parents before I moved out to college, where I live happily now. I used to live outside the city, and had a part-time job at a big retail store downtown. In order to get there, I had to take a bus, which was about a 30-minute ride. I mostly worked night shifts, as I still went to school and could work from around 5 p.m. to midnight, closing up the store and taking the very last bus back home. Like every night, after my shift, I would wait for the bus at the bus stop. This skinny Caucasian guy, 5'9", around 30 years old, with thick framed glasses and a buzz cut, stood next to me, and he kept rubbing his hands, mentioning how cold it was. I nodded and smiled politely, not thinking too much of it. He kept repeating how the weather was changing, and after a while I stopped responding to it, figuring he was just talking to himself. The bus arrived and I got on. Taking a seat in the back, he took a seat just 1 row behind mine. During the first 10 minutes of the ride, he didn't really say anything. You know how it can be dark outside and the windows reflect and function as mirrors? He kept turning his head to the side, watching me through the reflection in the window. I thought it was kind of odd, but still didn't think too much of it. He got off 1 stop before me, and I went home and forgot all about it. A few weeks later, I worked another shift, and as usual, I waited for the bus at the bus stop. I got on the bus, and to my surprise, this dude was on the bus again, sitting in the exact same seat. I recognized him because he looked particular. His posture was off, and the glasses stood out. As this was a Friday night, the bus was very full, and I had no choice but to sit 1 row behind him. He tapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, you take the 11:48 p.m. bus often?
I think I've seen you before. I nodded. I work nearby. We had this small talk conversation where I told him some small details about my life and who I was. That was a mistake. This is where things started to get really weird. Over the next few weeks, he would be waiting at the very bus stop every single shift I worked, or be on that very bus. He could have had a very similar job at a similar time schedule. But what truly weirded me out was that he kept trying to talk to me. How was work? I told him it was fine and tried to sound a bit rude in order to make him back off. You're quite a looker, he said. Do you have a girlfriend? Boyfriend, perhaps? I told him it was none of his business and that I would prefer to be left alone. He was a stranger after all. He seemed insulted and didn't speak to me for the rest of the ride. I didn't see him for a month until he showed up at my workplace. He walked up to me and smiled, waved sort of childlike, and he asked me where he can find a certain product, and I tell him where it is. After my shift, I wait for my bus and get on. Edward, I hear behind me. How was work? How was work? It must have been quite busy during the holidays. I turn around and see the guy again. I'm sorry, how do you know my name? Your name tag, silly. This is where he starts to ask me all sorts of questions about my school, parents, which bus stop I get off at. I ignored him and got off my stop. Well, Edward, I'll see you next week, he said with his childlike grin. I got really freaked out by this guy at this point and told my girlfriend about him. She thought it was just a harmless gay crush he had on me, but I explained to her that this guy was making me feel very uncomfortable. He knew all sorts of personal information about me and seemed to have nothing better to do than to take the same bus ride every single night. She figured she could pick me up from work instead, but I declined, as I was not going to let some stranger influence my life decisions and routines. Whenever I would get out of work, he would wait for me. It just seemed like he would. I told him to get lost after a few months. I graduated high school and quit my job to move to college. I still occasionally take that bus when I visit my parents, but I have only seen this guy once while doing so. He waved at me as if he had run into his old pal, and I ignored him. It might not be that scary to any of you, but this guy still freaks me out to this date. A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet from it. I didn't really think I would have many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot and last minute check the trash. It was time for a cigarette, and I had a headphone in, just kind of jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, he looked like he was enjoying a much-needed piss. Against the sheriff's office, though? Yeah. The building closed at 4 p.m. and didn't open until 6 in the morning. But why? By the back of his ripped t-shirt, I remembered that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going on. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working, until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then at me, and then back and forth again.
As the customer was leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning, and I had left my dustpan outside with the squidgy. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be more afraid of me, or something to that effect. The man was still there but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he's yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and could barely stand straight, still swaying away. I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off him during this time either. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience doing graveyard jobs has been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. I didn't like it at all and wanted no part in it. I had almost 3 hours to go, and 2 before any employees even got there. I instantly went on the computer and typed up a temporarily closed sign, just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming up to the counter and on my way to the doors when I saw that he had walked across the road to my side. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand mimed the hand signal for cut across my neck, basically saying, "Nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed." I shook my head back and forth, hoping to discourage him further. He started walking away, but screamed something at me as he was walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled. I mean, he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere. Definitely knowing I'm in the wrong shift of the wrong job, I got really skeeved out and decided to call the cops. It's a good thing too, because the minute I hung up with them, there he comes again up to the door. He starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I'd called the cops, and his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him, because once I'd said that, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't think he could have gone very far. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything like that. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have ever spent the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I never knew what the right choice was. I'm just glad that I don't work there anymore. When I was little, my stepdad used to work the night shift at a gas station on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada. It's a nice part of town off the highway before you head up to the Sierra Nevadas and Lake Tahoe. The area back then was fairly new, and the Shell gas station was really nice. My stepdad never had any problems working the night shift, though he did tell me some interesting characters would come in, and he would often have regulars that he'd become friends with. My stepdad was the only one in the shop when he worked the night shift, and he was always told about the ghosts that like to pester the other workers, like turn off the lights, open or close the bathroom doors, knock snacks off the shelves and the like. My stepdad, being the massive skeptic as he is, didn't believe any of these stories, and because nothing ever happened to him, he just brushed them off. Until one night. My stepdad is working on the night shift, and it's a pretty quiet night. He hasn't had many customers coming through other than for gas, and since it's a pay at the pump station, hardly anyone comes into the store. So my stepdad is playing on his phone and frequently glances up at the doors or at the security monitors to see if anyone was coming, but the station was deserted. He turns his attention back to his game when he hears the electronic sliding doors open and the sound of the bell above the door goes off. My stepdad puts down his phone and looks up to greet the customer, but he doesn't see anyone. He calls out to no answer. He glances at the security camera, but doesn't see anyone else in the shop except for him, and there are no cars at the station or the parking lot. He gets a little weirded out since the doors have sensors, and the only time they're open is if they sense someone approaching them. But he just talks it up to a prank or some sort of malfunction and resumes his name. Hello? He hears the voice as clear as day in front of him. His head immediately snaps up to speak to the customer he clearly did not see before. But there's no one there. He's even more weirded out, but convinces himself he was either imagining things or that the sound somehow came from his phone or the radio. And then he hears the screams. He said the sound of the women screaming just came out of nowhere, and they were so loud and so chilling, he jumped and dropped his phone. My stepdad is a pretty big guy, 6'2" and a little hefty, and he doesn't normally get scared over anything. But he said the screaming terrified him so much, he couldn't really think straight. He ran out from behind the counter and checked the aisles, but no one was there. He checked the bathrooms and maintenance closet, and no one was there either. But the screams were still going, and they were deafeningly loud. So he thinks maybe there was a woman outside who was being hurt or attacked. He runs out to where he thinks the woman is screaming. There's no one there. The lot is empty. There are no people, no cars, nothing. He checks around the back of the store and does a loop, but he can't find the source of the screaming. And just as suddenly as the screaming had started, it stopped. He goes back inside and checks the security tapes to see if he's missing anything. But other than him running inside and outside of the store like an idiot, he didn't see anything else, and he's unsure of what to think. The next day, as he's leaving work and his co-worker takes over, he tells them about what happened, brushing it off as just some weird prank some little shit pulled. But the co-worker's response was very different, and even though my stepdad doesn't believe in any sort of paranormal activity, the words stuck with him. Oh, so you've heard her too?
Back when I was in high school, I got a job at the McDonald's down the road from my house. It was the only place that called me back, and I needed a job. My father was a single dad who, due to failing eyesight, was on disability, and we weren't able to make ends meet if I didn't work. I ended up leaving school and working full-time at my job, quickly working my way up to a manager. After working 6 months during the normal morning and night shifts, they asked me if I could switch to third shift, which was 8 or 9 at night to 4 or 5 in the morning. I said yes, as it came with $1 raise, and I had just turned 18. The switch wasn't too bad. It took a few weeks to get on the new sleep cycle. I'm not even going to lie, to be honest, but I enjoyed the sunrise on my walk home, as it usually took me about 20 minutes to get to my store, as traffic wasn't so bad on the 8-lane boulevard it sat on, so about a 6-minute drive, I suppose. I normally walked, but tried to take rides from friends when I could, because I used to get catcalled and hit on a regular basis, and the men in my area are not the greatest, so it freaked me out to no end. One night, I had a guy come through the drive-thru at around 1 a.m. I opened the window telling him we were waiting on his order, and he started aggressively hitting on me, asking me where I lived and what time I got off, if I wanted to do something with him when I got off. Obviously no. At one point, he asked if I had a boyfriend. I told him yes, and he proceeded to ask me back to his place after work, and that my boyfriend didn't have to know. I was so relieved when I handed him his food and shut the window, walking to my cashier and asking him to see if he pulled away. He does, and I go through the rest of my night fairly normal. 4 a.m. rolls around, and the morning manager rolls in as I'm auditing the safe, relieving me for the day. I grab food and bullshit outside with the morning manager while we smoked a cig. Someone pulled up to the drive-thru, and she tossed me a cig for my walk home and ran in. So I just put my headphones on and started to walk home. I crossed the aforementioned main road and headed down this road that ran parallel to the highway. The highway is on the left, and there are a few buildings on the right, but most of them are empty offices at night. There are some houses at the end of the curve closer to my neighborhood, but for the most part there are no people. As I'm walking, I can see headlights coming up. I think it's just a car driving by, but after a minute I realize that the car should have passed. I gaze up to my left and see that this car is keeping speed with me. I take out my headphones, and it's the same dude. He asked me if I wanted to go get high with him back at his place, and he got really pushy. I start to power walk away, and he ends up driving ahead and pulling his car up in front of me, blocking my path. He asked me if I was sure I didn't want to ride. I told him no, and to piss off, and he noped the hell out of there while I was calling my boyfriend. I ended up switching back to morning shifts shortly after, and carrying a knife in my bag with me at all times. I'm a 23-year-old female, but at the time I was working, I was turning 19, and for reference, this all takes place at my local gas station. I have a fairly young face, and am very short, to the point that I had to climb onto the checkout counter to stock cigarettes. It was not fun, and the customers loved to watch. So I've had many experiences, but this one takes the cake. There was this local dealer that came in a few times a night to get soda and food. The gas station I worked at specialized in fried chicken, and he always had a special order made by the cook, who I was good friends with. The dealer was called Bubba. Most of my co-workers brought from him often, so oftentimes they would go behind the place to buy from him. I worked 4 p.m. to midnight, and on my first night he came. He took a shine to me and began to flirt. Many people have taken my kindness as flirting. He was one of these people, and it got creepy pretty soon. He kept saying how he and I would have dates, and he'd tell me about this yellow dress he bought for me to wear on the date. One night, on my way out of clocking out, he approached me, which caught me off guard, and he kissed me on the cheek and then walked away laughing, leaving me standing there shocked and feeling violated. It freaked me out, but not enough for me to stop coming to work because I really enjoyed my job. Now, whenever I took breaks, I took them at this dark area next to the store that had a makeshift bench on it. It was quiet, and I liked it. Turns out one night when I didn't take my break because it got so busy, he was waiting for me there. Now one night he calls the store asking my supervisor to speak to me. She knew this guy was a creep and told him that I wasn't working. She hung up on him after a few moments and later told me what he said afterwards. Apparently he sounded very drunk and said, I could see her in the window. She isn't working. Put her on the damn phone. He was very angry for some reason, and she made sure to keep an eye out for him that night. Fast forward 2 days. I'm working my usual shift and it's around midnight. Our policy is that we have to close the store in order for it to roll into a new business day. A car pulls up in front of the store, and from where I was stationed, I could see outside the store into the parking lot. It was Bubba sitting in his car staring at me, with a very angry look on his face. He didn't exit the vehicle, he just sat there staring. He seemed to be playing with something whilst staring at me. Now in walks my friend, who was surprising me by picking me up that night. My one male friend, who is super tall, said they walked past his car and happened to look over. Bubba was playing with a big knife, and there was duct tape and rope sitting in the front seat. After that, I noped out of there and quit that job. We see him once in a while around town, but I'm always with friends. I'm just lucky he never learned my first name, and that I didn't walk home that night like I usually do. It was a pretty freaky experience that shattered my innocent view of the world. This story takes place about 2 years ago. I was working graveyard in a small town casino in the cafe on Halloween night. I was dressed up as Hermione because I'm a huge Harry Potter fan and my work has a Halloween contest, so I thought I would put myself out there, which I never do, and get in on the fun. Now, my outfit consisted of a short skirt with leggings and a polo shirt and a tie, all Gryffindor themed. So I'm the cashier and it's about 2 a.m. We don't usually have many customers at this time, but since it's Halloween we were busier than normal. So I'm just checking people out and doing my job and actually having a good time, seeing everyone dressed up. When this guy comes to the counter, I can tell immediately that he's drunk. He was super tall, at least 6 foot, and really buff and bald. I remember his total was like 240. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. All he had was a $100 bill, and I had to tell my manager to get change. He looks at me and goes, "No, this is for you. I'll pay for the coffee separately." Now, as a cashier, we hardly ever get tips, but if someone wants to tip you, they can. But no one has ever tipped me this much before. So I was like, as I wasn't sure if he was serious. He then looks me up and down and says, "It's for you to come to my room with me." I immediately handed back the $100 bill and said, "No thank you." He takes out another $100 bill and throws them both at me and goes, "How about now?" "No, thank you," again. Luckily, security were close by and saw what was going on. He came over and nicely asked the guy to pay for his coffee and leave. The guy looks at the security guard and says, "If she's gonna dress like a horse, she should act like one." At this point, I'm close to tears. I've had my fair share of creepy guys in my life, but never like this. Never in my face. The security guy tells him to pay for his coffee and leave immediately, or he will be escorted out. The guy looks at me and says, "Okay, bitch. I'll wait for you outside. You better meet me there, or else." I'm just standing there not really sure what to say or do, because this guy was very intimidating. The security guy tells him that is a threat and calls the cops. The guy goes crazy and tries to hit the security guard, but he missed, and the guy puts him by the wall and radios over for someone else to call the cops. So the creep keeps looking over at me and saying,
Why do all whores act like this? At least I would have paid you, as well as other obscene things. This all happened so quickly and escalated at such a rate that I barely had time to think. At this point I'm crying, and my co-workers take me to the back. The cops came and arrest the guy. I guess he had punched a hole through the wall and tried to hit one of the cops. The cops took my statement, and I was allowed to leave early, and the same security guy walked me to my car. Now, the messed up thing is apparently that this guy was a huge spender at the casino, and the casino didn't even press charges or 86'd him or anything. I quit soon after. Last month, I got a job at a mini-mart to pay for uni, since my savings weren't quite enough. I was only able to take night shifts, since I spent most of the day at school and at home studying. When you're on the night shift all alone, it's not too hard, since barely anyone comes in the evenings. There's an office when employees can hang out when there's nothing to do, and there you can monitor the security cameras and go over what needs to be done. The security cameras even have built-in motion detectors that will alert you if movement is detected. I spend most of my time there with snacks and playing on my phone while I wait for customers to come in. The other employees describe it as getting paid for being alone in a store with the occasional break to help the handful of customers that come in during the night. On my first shift, I immediately noticed something out of the ordinary was going on. The motion detectors would go off whenever the store was empty, and the cameras didn't show anything. Then I began hearing faint voices and footsteps from within the store. The voices would be indistinct, but spoken in the same tone that a person would usually speak in when they're chatting with someone they haven't met in a long time. Even customers would sometimes hear this and think it was me saying something when really I hadn't said anything at all. I usually go to checkout but find nothing. The store will be empty, and later when I was refilling the soda cooler, I started seeing people walk past me in the reflection of the glass door, but no one was there. This happened several times, and I never saw anyone near me. The coolers would also sometimes open and slam quietly shut at random times. Do you know that feeling you get when you're in a crowded room? That minor claustrophobic sense? And that feeling like people are looking at you? That's how I always feel when I'm closing up the store and cleaning up. It could be paranoia, and I'm just imagining it, but my past experiences led me to believe it's not. I've never had the nerve to mention this to my boss out of fear of getting labeled crazy and possibly fired for being unfit, but I am dead certain there is something going on there. I don't intend to quit anytime soon, since I don't feel like I'm in any danger, and I don't need the money, but this scares me a lot. Every night seems to have more going on than the last, and I've began writing down in my phone what I witness. I'm not aware that anyone has died in the store, but it's been open since the 1920s, and anything could have happened. I've wanted to do research, but it's changed names and owners several times, which makes it a bit difficult. There are also times when I begin to hear footsteps, when I'm alone inside the store doing inventory or other duties. Sometimes I hear them walking right up behind me and stopping. It was a problem I had encountered earlier, but now it's become much more clear. Everything else is still present. The slamming coolers, moving reflections, and they've stayed relatively the same for now. What's made me sure of it was one night when I was closing up. I turned off the lights, and before I walked out of the office, I glanced at the cameras and saw a person standing in the store. I panicked and turned the lights back on, and they were gone. I didn't see it clearly, so it could have been an illusion, but I'm sure I saw a person. This, however, only happened once. After taking shifts there, I also have a harder time falling asleep the same night. It could be paranoia or irrational anxiety over the store, but it's possible that it had something to do with it. This doesn't happen at my other job. I've decided to give in my 2 weeks' notice soon. I've got another job as a security guard at a concert venue, and I think I'd be better suited. I doubt a lot of people will believe me, but I swear, it's all true.
I am a water treatment plant operator. I've been doing this job for about a decade. I've been the night shift guy my whole career. The nights are normally quiet, and can be boring if everything is going to plan. My plant has a few different builds. The oldest is 60 or so years old. The main building I spend a majority of the shift in is only about 20 years old. For more backstory of the area, this used to be a booming, energized area. This area was littered with railroad tracks and drifters coming in and out on the trains of yesteryear. Our farms and factories were very bountiful back then. Now that you all understand that, you must also understand that with success in the area, there is also darkness. From the settling of the area, wars with natives, and even in the 30s and 40s of people being killed in train wrecks and bad business deals, the ground is laced with it. The silence of the night shift can be eerie all on its own. Lots of bumps and bangs in the dimly lit darkness. On the night I'm about to speak about, everything started off as normal. I came in around sunset, got the nightly Passover, and began my work. Around midnight, I had to do my rounds around the property while getting the nightly pump numbers. I made my rounds with nothing but a flashlight around the main building. The oldest building is a good walking distance away from the main one. I sat out in the dark, heading for that building. I must also add that we aren't in the nicest area of town. However, I'm a big guy and can hold my own. As I made my walk, I got an uneasy feeling. I had gotten them before, but I have a job to do, and nothing came out of it. I rounded the corner and unlocked the door. As I did, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I have a job to do though, so I opened the door, and there, in the darkness, stood nothing. I walked in and proceeded to get my numbers, and as I turned to shut the door, I looked up down the hallway to see a woman in pure white look at me through the other door. I almost jumped out my boots and peed myself a little. I fell backwards as I came back to reality, and once again made eye contact with this entity. As I met her gaze, everything in me said, "Hey, your life's in danger." Her face distorted and started to shift around. I was now frozen as she shifted into what looked like an Indian warrior. Her eyes were glowing. As I got to my feet, she had shifted into this huge wolf creature. The growls were chilling to say the least. It snarled, then ran towards me. I had no time to even shut the door. I ran as fast as I could, screaming bloody murder. I felt like it was trying to bite my backside. I got a hold of my pant leg and swore it tore it to shreds. I stumbled and rolled, but somehow managed to make it onto my feet. I darted into the main building, and as I shut the door, I felt a hard thud on the other side. I locked the doors and ducked down inside. I could hear the thing casing the building, growling and scratching at the walls. I got the courage to look out the window, and just ended up face to face with the white lady again. I had the police come and sit with me until the sun came up. No one else has seen the white lady since. It's still quite freaky, but I do have a job to do. I've worked at this 115-room hotel for a few years now, and a number of employees, myself included, have had experiences centered around the continually defunct hotel restaurant. Several people, both from our housekeeping and others who have tried opening businesses there, have reported hearing a girl's voice trying to get their attention when they're back in the kitchen area. One maid, back when we used to have part of the restaurant to prep the continental breakfast, mentioned seeing a girl in her late teens/early 20s, dressed in white, walking past her into an adjoining room. When she turned to tell the girl that we weren't open yet, the girl had vanished. A large 3x4-inch painting in the dining room area had a tendency to lift up and off the two large hooks it was hung on and end up in the middle of the floor. This happened a half a dozen times before I removed the painting and tossed it into the storage room. I'm not fond of having to investigate loud crashing sounds in the middle of the night, you see. Once, and thankfully only once, I had a can of soda start to slowly slide down a long counter towards me while I was reading in a side office. I remember being completely frozen for a moment, not breathing, not moving an inch, while it scraped its way across the laminate countertop. It travelled several feet before I finally jumped from my chair and snatched it off the counter, yelling out, "Knock it off!" This particular encounter happened a few weeks ago. It had been an extremely slow night, and I'd been browsing on my laptop in the back office when I heard the front desk bell ring. We keep the lobby open 24 hours, so it wasn't terribly unusual to still get a guest arriving at 3 a.m. It took me a few seconds to walk to the front, but as I stepped out, I was surprised to see the lobby was completely vacant. Now, the lobby door makes a particular metal scraping sound when they open and close, and I hadn't heard someone pass through them. I could dismiss not hearing the sound of a person entering the lobby before the bell rang, because I hadn't been paying attention, but there was no way I could have missed the sound of them exiting as I walked to the front. In fact, aside from the low-volume classical music being played over the muzak, the lobby was completely silent. Curious and confused, I walked back into the office and replayed the security footage to see if I could find out where the guest had gone. This is from the surveillance cameras above the front desk, aimed towards the back of the lobby. Just out of the frame to the right is the entrance to the restaurant area. The doors are always kept locked. About 6 years ago, when I was still in high school and living in my parents' house, I had begun having some very odd experiences. I'm going on record stating I have always believed in the paranormal. It's my belief that there are things out there that we can't explain, and that we need to be careful of. I used to hear demonic voices besides the head of my bed every morning at 4 to 5 a.m. At first I thought it was the radio. That's when I realized it couldn't be, because I hadn't slept with my radio on since I was 12. I woke up every morning to confirm that my radio was in fact turned off. That same year, around the same time all of this was happening, I was in the bathroom getting ready to take a shower. The only thing running was the water in the shower, and the door to the shower was closed. The door to the bathroom was closed. The vents were off and not heating nor cooling the house, so no air was coming out. The one tiny bathroom window was closed, but somehow a brand new, untouched, just put on the roll of toilet paper roll somehow outwound itself on the floor, but not like a little bit, but half the roll had managed to unwind itself. Also, while growing up, I'd be lying in bed and feel like there was something tugging my blankets off. I had vivid memories of clutching onto my blankets and feel something on the other end,
giving me some sort of tug of war. As well as when I was very young, I would feel things on the top of my bed, so I would flail my legs, and once in a while I would make contact with something pushing it off my bed. This could have just been my cats, as I grew up with a few of them, although sometimes my door to my room would be closed and none of them would be able to enter. Finally, I used to work security at a hospital. I swear to God, one night I got called in for the night shift. As I was approached by a member of the cleaning staff, something seemed off. We spoke for a bit, and they brought up ghosts, asking if I believed in them. It was around 2 to 3 in the morning, and the cleaner even mentioned that ghost activity tends to peak around these hours. However, maybe about an hour or two after, I was walking around and bumped into a different cleaner, and when I asked her what happened to the other person who had been cleaning in the section of the hospital I was just in, I was told that there hadn't been another cleaner, just the dude that I was speaking to at that very moment.
I used to work at a hospital for the mentally ill. Although it was a hospital, it didn't look like a regular one. It was more homely, but it still contained tough security systems, so patients couldn't go into any rooms without an electronic key. Only their bedrooms were accessible to them. Anyway, we had one patient in particular who would always shout randomly at the air and argue with it. We knew she hallucinated a lot, and would jokingly ask her who she was talking to. She would always say that she was arguing with a couple, male and female, who lived upstairs. The only rooms upstairs were the staff room and some offices. One night, I was doing the night shift. It was late, and I was cleaning the lounge, when I noticed a shadowy figure move in the reflection. I wasn't scared though, as I just thought it must have been another staff member, or even one of the patients who would come out of their bedroom. I immediately peeked down the long corridor, but it was completely empty. I thought I must have been tired and just imagined it, so I ignored it. Later that night, I was trying to have a quick nap, and I sat with the TV in front of me off, and I saw the shadowy figure walk by through the TV reflection. But this time I heard my name being whispered. I thought it was a staff member who had caught me trying to have a quick nap, but lo and behold, the corridor was empty. I didn't bother telling anyone, as I felt they would clearly not believe my story. A few days later, during a day shift, a bunch of us staff members were talking about the patient that hallucinates, when one of the staff members spoke about an experience he had on the night shift. He described seeing a shadowy figure through the reflection of a glass door. The others laughed at him, but I told him that I had experienced it as well. We were both creeped out, as we knew that we clearly hadn't imagined it. Plus, this patient's story became more intriguing after another patient started complaining of a mysterious woman who she would see walking up and down at night and claimed to have lived upstairs. This really freaked me out. I had just started working graveyard at the gas station close to my house. I believe it was the 6th shift I'd done, but the 4th by myself. It was just after 11 o'clock, and this man came in. He's about 40 and had the dumbest haircut I'd ever seen. A blotched bowl cut. Anyway, he asked me if I had change for 100. I told him I'm sorry, but I wasn't allowed to take it, and even if I was, I still didn't have the change. Just as a side note, the company's 3rd shift policy was that we were not to take $50 or $100 bills, period. Well, he got upset and started complaining.
he started trying to talk to me into getting him change from the safe. I apologized, but again said that I couldn't, and I tried my best to continue on to the elderly customer waiting behind him. He called out to his friend to ask if he had anything smaller. The kind lady I was waiting on asked me to hold her bag while she used the restroom. Bulcut's friend comes in, and I immediately saw that he's on drugs. Now, I try not to judge people, but it was obvious. His face was covered in sores, kept touching at them, and he kept bouncing in place on his toes. The friend started asking me questions. "Hey, sweetheart, how you doing? You always here by yourself? Do they let you have weapons behind the counter? Do you carry one at work? I always carry a gun. How much money do they allow you to carry in the drawers? Do you still have to do the safe drops even though business is so slow?" Each question that he asked made me slightly more uncomfortable. I'm kind of a mouthy woman, and I don't always use my head before I speak. Finally, I interrupted him and was like, "Look, do you plan to rob me? Because if you are, then you're wasting your time. I don't have time for this, and I need to get back to work." His hands fly up, and he started sputtering. Whoa, rob you? I was just trying to make conversation." I answered, "Well, then your conversation skills could really use some work. You don't ask a woman working alone overnight those type of questions, so the real question is what's wrong with you?" I saw now that Bulcut had pulled the car horizontally across the parking lot spaces closest to the door. Upon seeing this, I was just beyond done at this point. I told him to leave the store and never come back during my shift, or I'd call the cops. He left. The poor woman, who had gone to the bathroom, had heard some of the exchange. She came up to me before leaving the store and asked if I was all right. I told her that I was, and thanked her. Just a weird customer that gave me a weird feeling. He only came back once after that. I was in the cooler and could hear him yelling at the manager about not being allowed at the store. The manager told him that he had listened to the audio and would have done the same thing I did. I know what some could possibly be thinking. I was over-defensive and dramatic. He was probably asking about the money because I couldn't change his friend's 100. But what about the other questions? I still don't know. In high school, I worked the 12-hour shift every Sunday at the corporate Conoco gas station, when Conoco was headquartered in Greenway Plaza in Houston, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. The station was at Highway 59 and Wesleyan. I worked with a friend from school. Two other guys worked a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift that partially overlapped. We were a full-service station. This also gave the full-time workers Sundays off. One of the other guys from high school, Billy, worked some of the week's night shifts with a full-time night worker named Jim. He complained that Jim made him do all the work, while Jim turned tricks in the parking lot. When we asked Jim about it, he admitted he had some admirers. So one day we get a phone call from the gas station manager, and he tells us that Jim has been murdered at the gas station, and the police would like to question all of the workers. My mother is freaked before we even meet the cops. However, the meeting is called off because Billy confessed. He and another student hatched a plan to rob the safe. While Jim was busy, they tried to open the safe, but they can't. The other kid needs his share, so when Jim comes into the station, they jump him and tell him to open the safe. Jim says he can't, that the combination's been changed. So they take Jim to the garage bay, tie him up, and beat him to try and get the safe open. They work on Jim for over an hour before the other kid loses his temper and cuts Jim's throat. Both are arrested and charged with capital murder. The garage bay was a horrid mess, and the mechanic starts saying they can hear moaning noises.
We had to quit our jobs, and I went to work at an AMC movie theatre. Business dropped off at the gas station, and Conoco moved its headquarters to I-10 West. The station closed and was torn down, and after a few years a new Chevron station was built in its place. A couple of years ago I stopped to get gas at the Chevron. The guy behind the bulletproof glass wasn't too busy, and I told him I used to work at this location in the old days. He looked even more bored, and I asked him if he or the other workers had ever heard any noises in the back area. He perked up and asked, "What do you mean exactly?" "Like unexplained sounds," I say. He then looks at me and says, "Some of the guys say they hear a moaning noise, and someone saying help in a whisper." I told him that was the murdered guy, Jim. One night, I was working a night shift in a refinery. I was working as a hole watch for my shift, which means I basically sit at an entrance and document anyone that goes in and out. Well, a guy showed up. I got his name and he gave me the company he worked for, so I logged him in. Everything checked out. So I'm waiting at the entrance for a few hours and the guy comes out. Now, that's nothing unusual, because most of the people that go in will stay there for 2 to 6 hours at a time, and every hour or two, I yell up to make sure they're okay. I would yell, and usually the guys whistle back or make a noise to let me know everything's okay, and every time I check, I thought I heard a response. Later, a few more guys come up and go in. I log them in and let them know there's another man up there doing some inspections. They go in and radio back, "Hey, there's no one in here." I immediately got a weird feeling, because I was the only entrance/exit, and there's no possible way to escape the container without me knowing. The way the container is set up is that you have to climb a ladder right up in from underneath using a scaffolding to help. I was sitting on the scaffolding far back enough to where if anyone came out, they would drop right down in front of me, and the only way off it was through the gate opening that I was guarding. So I radio my foreman and explained to him what's going on. He got in contact with the company, and they had no one by that name, and no one scheduled to check that particular container. I was completely baffled at this point. Here I am, adamant as ever that someone went up into the container. I thought I was going crazy, and I was also a little weirded out. I had a signature on the log where they sign, and I have to sign right next to their name, acknowledging that I know that they were going in. For about 20 minutes I'm in full panic mode and freaking out, because I don't have any explanation as to what happened, or where he went or who he was, and to top it all off, I could have easily lost my job because of it. I worked at Waffle House on the night shift for almost 2 years, and this guy came in one night when they had me at a different store location than usual. He sat in my section, so of course I set him up and tried to be friendly. He immediately began telling me that I was really hot. I was uncomfortable, but I had been spoken to more inappropriately before, so I just kind of brushed it off. He ordered his food and everything was fine for the most part, until the end of his meal. He went back to telling me that I was gorgeous. He asked me for my number, but I told him no thanks, and that did not go well with him. He started to really bug me, so I walked away and told another server to take care of him for the rest of the time. I even let them keep the tip. He was offended that I wouldn't come and speak to him, and when he got up to pay for his meal, he walked back up to me and started asking for my number more aggressively. I tried to walk away, but he kept following. One of the cooks spoke up and told him he'd have to leave if he kept it up. He lost it after that, began cursing and talking about how he could take really good care of me, talking about how great his thing was. At this point, I just walked to the back part of the store and stayed there until he left. One of the other servers apologized and said that he was actually a regular, and they think that he's a pimp from across the street at this shady motel. A few hours had passed, and I stepped out back to smoke. A few minutes later, he came walking around the back of the building, approaching me again. I immediately went back in and closed the door before he had a chance to say a word. He was literally just sitting in the parking lot waiting for me. I had to have a cook walk me to my car when my shift ended. Since that day, I have refused to work at that location ever again. For several weeks last year, I was asked to cover and supervise a warehouse team on an evening shift, working until midnight. One of my duties was to check the whole warehouse at the end of the shift for security, as well as health and safety reasons, ensuring everything was good for morning shift who started at 7 a.m. I'm not really one for measurements and can't tell you the exact size of your warehouse, but think of a large supermarket over 3 floors, and that gives you a pretty good indication over how big it is. One night, I was running late in the warehouse alone. It was 1:45 in the morning. The top floor was laid out in long, narrow picking aisles, much like a supermarket, with a small packing area where I was stood collecting paperwork. All of the aisles were in complete darkness, as the lights were powered by movement. The only lit area was the packing bench where I stood. I was standing a square off one of the aisles and could see down to the very far end of the top floor where I was. I just finished my paperwork when I heard a click, and the lights at the very far end of the aisle come on. I knew there was a person at the end as it illuminated the door and wall. I looked quite surprised. I knew there wasn't anyone else there, because they'd all gone 45 minutes before. I'd watched them leave. I checked, and the lights came back on. By this point, I'm starting to crap myself, as one by one of the aisles begins to light up section by section, as if something or someone were walking directly past me. The hairs on the back of my neck stuck up, and I was frozen as the whole aisle clicked and lit up, until it eventually reached the end of the aisle, just feet away from where I was standing. It's safe to say, I never stayed in that late motel in the warehouse on my own again, and it did freak me out. This happened around 3 years ago. I worked as a correctional officer for about 5 years in an old country jail. One night, while I was doing my rounds, I entered our high security unit. This unit was mostly for unruly and dangerous inmates who often liked to fight over others or who had high notoriety cases such as murders. It was 11 o'clock at night, and the lights were about to go off. In this particular unit, a lot of the inmates would stand at the doors and watch the dayroom TV from their cell, since it was a solitary housing unit. I finished my rounds downstairs, and I began climbing to the top tier. I glanced up at a near cell and saw an inmate watching TV from his door. I looked away and looked back, and in an instant he was gone. I walked up to the cell and looked in. It was a completely vacant cell. My stomach dropped. I had heard from co-workers and inmates often that the jail was definitely haunted, but this was my first personal experience with anything of that nature. I finished up my rounds and returned to my sergeant's office, where I told him about what I had experienced. Very calmly he asked which cell it was. I told him, number 7. He told me that about 15 years prior, an inmate had ended their own life in that exact cell after he was charged with the murder of his child. My sergeant was a young officer at the time and was the first on the scene.
He told me that he truly believed that the inmate was framed for the murder, and the mother was truly the guilty one. The story gave me chills. As a teenager, I would frequently experience numerous paranormal events, the spookiest of which happened when I was 19. My grandfather and father also experienced similar things, but on this occasion, me and my father experienced the same thing together. We used to walk together and went to a client site, a pharmaceutical company, late at night. No one was there, and everything was locked up. We entered the premises and sat in the same office working on 2 different PCs, and we immediately locked up behind us, so there was no way that anyone could enter behind us. After a half hour of working, suddenly me and my dad look at each other at the exact same time, and I could see the goosebumps on his arm from where I was sitting. I felt a deep chill across my entire body, and had goosebumps all over me. We both looked at the doorway, and there stood a lady in a long white dress. There were no feet. She was floating, and had a sort of featureless face. She shifted out of view down the hall, and we promptly got up and peered down the hall, and there was nothing. A few moments later I heard a woman's voice call my name, and at that exact moment, my dad yelped, "Did you hear that?" I thought I heard someone call my name, and we got the hell out of there very quickly.
I was at Huntington Beach doing a celebration banquet for the school's band, and as the night was coming to a close, some band kids noticed that some people were circulating a bonfire. Me and my buddy were going to try and join them because we thought they were joking, but then someone about 10 to 20 feet away began to start hitting a bell, and everyone that was circulating the bonfire started walking towards it. Just wait. It gets creepier. We suddenly notice that there are candles in the sand, about 10 to 15. People get in a circle and some of them start to remove their clothing. At this point I really had to take a leak, so I'm walking to the bathroom at the beach, and in the distance I can hear all of the people potentially doing a ritual start screaming out loud. This was creeping me out. I go back to where the band group was, and everyone was packing up everything. It was around 9:30 or 10, almost beach closing time, and as I return, some people in the candle circle are walking on all fours, while some people are standing and doing a T-pose, while they're saying some things that are simply indecipherable to me. And then they proceed to all strip to their underwear and run into the ocean. I work night shifts as a security officer in a very large office building who has to do 3 nightly patrols. There are 2 officers who sit at the same reception desk between patrols. We're the only people in the building after 10 p.m. Anyway, the job itself is pretty simple. I walk around with a PDA scanning different checkpoints throughout the complex. Now for the creepy stuff. There is a particular part of the complex which I'll refer to as Building 1, where things just feel weird. The air is thick, and you have a constant feeling of being watched. I just put my earphones in and power through this part of my patrol, as nothing out of the ordinary other than feeling uneasy usually happens. A few nights ago, it was myself and another new start working, and we were both sat at the reception, chatting away, when we hear a really loud bang from right beside us. Imagine someone dropping a phone book from the top of a stepladder onto laminate flooring. We are both quite obviously shaken up, and look around for the source of the noise. We can't find any. Weird? Fast forward to the last night, and I'm working with a different guy who's been working there longer than I have. Same scenario. Both sitting around chatting away, and we hear this almighty bang, a lot louder than the previous time, coming from building 1. We both jump and look at each other and say in unison, "What the hell was that?" I look over at the reception desk to the building, and the sensor lights are all off, meaning no one was out there. I call out, "Hello, is anyone there?" To which almost as soon as I called out, we both heard a quieter, more distant bang. I go to investigate the sound and find nothing that could have caused the noise. It's worth noting that we have monitored the CCTV, and upon checking back, we can conclude that there was definitely no one else in the building. So I can't rule out logical cause, because if it is some sort of paranormal experience, how would I get whatever it is to ease off a bit, so I don't have to feel unnerved every time I go to work? Or any way to cope with the feeling of unease? I've had paranormal experiences before, but not somewhere I have to visit regularly. Any advice would be appreciated. This happened very recently. I work night shift. I don't drive, but I live 15 minutes away from my place of work. I live next to a cemetery. Around here, they don't put lights or many power poles in cemeteries, so there are no street lights on most of my walk. The night was extremely quiet. All the town's shops were closed. There were no bars around, so the streets were deserted. I shared my phone location with my boyfriend and my best friend when I began walking, because I had a bad feeling. The darkness was cut by a few porch lights as I walked. My footsteps sounded like they were echoing. There were slightly offbeat sounds between my steps. I stopped and looked back quickly, but no one was there. I continued to walk and the sound started again. I looked back and it stopped. The lights from a porch illuminated a pair of feet behind a car on the street. I was 3 houses down from mine. I booked it. I never knew my tiny legs could run so fast. The steps were behind me. I threw my door open so fast it hit my wall and I slammed it, locking both locks and flipping off all my lights and putting a chair underneath my doorknob. It didn't seem like anyone was behind me anymore, but this person knew where I lived. I sat on my floor quietly, crying, holding my hamster in my lap for a minute as I tried to calm myself. My home is a separate garage apartment outside a house. It's very quiet usually, and the only noise really being my hamster, and my hamster is asleep by 5 a.m. I heard rustling around my house all night. At 5:30 a.m. I heard a knock on my door. No voices or anything, just knocks and shuffling, then more rustling. My boyfriend came by to check on me that morning, and my doormat was moved, but nothing else was too amiss. I didn't call the police, but there's good reason. The police are shared with multiple cities, so they don't usually come or show up late, just to not really assist. I wanted to go to bed and stay quiet. To the guy who followed me home, let's not meet again. This is from a good few years back, in my pre-barman days being a kitchen porter, so washer-upper and general dog's body. To give context, the pub itself is very old. The village had a notoriously flaky power supply, and the kitchen door had a thin glass window. On this particular evening, the power had gone out, but the emergency lighting was keeping everything roughly visible, and the landlord stuck his head out and said due to health and safety, he couldn't allow customers in the building without power, and once I'd finished washing up, or the hot water ran out, I could go home. About a half hour later, I see someone in what looked like a trench coat with a hood on go from the beer garden into the pub.
and a few seconds later, I hear the gents' door open and close. Just the landlord cleaning. I finish cleaning in the deathly quiet, with the emergency lighting getting dimmer. I go behind the bar and press for the doorbell, for the flat upstairs where the landlord lived. As he comes down, I say, "Hey boss, all done. What were you doing in the beer garden?" "Yeah?" he replies. "Oh, I saw you go out and then come into the gents." "Nah. After I locked up and spoke with you, I went upstairs." So we checked the pub for intruders. Every door and window was locked. The only thing in the gents was the lack of any and all warmth that every other room had. The landlord asked about the guy, and I explained, and he said it wasn't a trench coat, but a robe. Turns out there used to be a priest hole in there from the Reformation, and I've never run home so quickly in my life. I started bartending at this place, and all the employees said, "Don't close up alone," but would never tell me why. Fast forward 2 months and our doorman quit, so I was closing up the bar. It was about 2 a.m. and I was all alone. The doors were shut and locked, so I could clean and no one could slip in. After I finished cleaning, I started gathering my things and turning off everything. Games, jukeboxes, extra lights and so forth, and headed to the door, and music starts playing from the jukebox, which is clearly off. So I go, turn it on, then off again, and it fixes the problem. I gather my things again, and a golf game starts playing music. I thought the machine had just broken, so I go to the switch to turn it off. It's not plugged in. I instantly started sweating and moving towards the door. I left everything except my keys and phone. As soon as I get outside, I felt safer, but I knew I still had to get the bolt on the door before I could make my escape. It was an old, janky metal door that would stick, so I always kicked it to get it unstuck. Well, this night, as soon as I kicked the door, I slipped the lock on, and as soon as it clicked, something hit the door from the inside. I hauled ass to my car and drove away as fast as possible. The next day, I get pulled into the office for leaving the jukebox on all night. So I told my boss what happened, and we checked the security cameras so that you could see I turned it off, and you could clearly see the door jolt from the kick and then a second jolt. No one ever had to close down alone again after that.
I work at a video store. Yes, those still exist in Canada. So I work mostly evening/night shift. The store is located in a pretty calm neighborhood. Nothing special. Usual suburb. I live really near and don't own a car, so I walk down to my house, and it takes about 20 minutes or so. The last shift's walk was a little bit special. Creepy, I would say. I finish at about 11, lock the door, say goodbye to my co-worker and start my journey home, alone. About 5 minutes later, at the first intersection, I saw them. A woman and a little boy were roughly 30 feet away from me, coming from the other street. But something was wrong. The woman was walking backwards, dragging the little boy under the armpits with his boots in the snow. The scene sent a chill down my spine and made me stop. The woman saw me and immediately said, "Oh, don't worry, he's okay. He's just sleepwalking." And then she proceeded to explain that it was kind of a night terror, and that the fresh air helps him relax. The only way he would stop screaming, "I'm falling," was to keep him in contact with the ground at all times. That's why she was dragging him like so. Anyhow, I continued my walk. I was looking back to see if they were following me. I'm not easily scared, but I have to admit that this walk home was a little bit longer than usual. The worst part is, if I see them again, this would be the only thing validating the story of the woman. Otherwise, I'll never know if she was just lying to me.
Back when I was in Boy Scouts, I spent the night on an aircraft carrier. The staff in charge of watching us chose me and 3 of my friends to be on fire watch. I think they made it up, but we believed them. Our job was to go check the ship for any fires or any other dangers every hour. We went on one tour with them, and then they took us up to the break room. We spent the next hour watching some Indiana Jones. Then we did the next check. This cycled until around 3 a.m. At around midnight, they told us of the people that had died on the ship when it was in use. They said it had old surveillance footage of terrible stuff. Up until then, it was really fun. On this check, we were afraid. We approached a hallway and heard an odd noise. It sounded like a child. We were a little freaked out. Why would a kid be on the ship this late? We were on fire watch though, so we had to see what it was. We walked down some stairs and into the hallway. We had one flashlight between the 4 of us, and all the lights were off here, so everything that wasn't hit by our lights was pitch black. Hallways stretched down in every direction, but ropes cut off the ones that were closed. Along the way, there were mannequins everywhere. Each one made me jump as the light revealed its face. Then we saw the kid. He was sitting on the floor, crying. He was down a hall cut off by ropes. For 1 second I thought it was a ghost, but he started talking. He was 4 years old and with his dad for the night. He had to go pee but couldn't find the bathroom. He somehow got really far away. We took him back to bed and explained it all to his dad. Then we went back and finished the second Indiana Jones movie and passed out. It was a really weird night and still freaks me out.
I work at a Jimmy John's in the worst part of my town. I mainly work closing shifts, which are the ones with very, very little business. It also means that the only people in the store are our driver, my manager, and me. This took place a few months ago. Since it was the beginning of the school year, we had several people quit so they could make it to classes. So we had a lot of openings. One night as we were getting ready to leave, a man walked in. He immediately put my spidey senses in overdrive, not only since he was wearing dirty clothes, but also because he was shaking really badly. Like it was 30 degrees outside. Oh, and he was also wheeling in his bike in one hand, and in the other, holding open a carton of buttermilk. The conversation went as follows. "Hey man, what can I do for you?" "Hey, I filled out an application a while ago, and I never heard back. Just wanted to check on that." "Oh sure, let me ask my manager." By this time, my manager, who was just around the corner, had actually heard the conversation through the headset. This guy's no good. He told me in the interview he didn't have a house or car. Plus, look at his arms. I stole a glance at his arms, where I saw at least a dozen drag marks, which are basically left from doing heroin. Just bullshit something to get him out. I turned around and told him some garbage about how the position was already filled. He obviously looked annoyed at this, and before he whipped his bike around to leave, he flipped me off. I told him to enjoy his night too, and looked down at the monitor to look busy. That's when it happened. As he left, he reeled back and slammed his buttermilk against the door, covering the glass and floor beneath. After he was gone, I was asked to clean it up.
Then after we closed, I saw a dude on a bike that looked like he was watching from across the street. We called the police and dipped out of there, but nothing ever came of it. I guess he just wanted to freak us out. I'm a manager at a movie theatre and often work until about 2 a.m. I have a few stories that come to mind from creepy experiences working the night shift. The first one was when I was walking down a hallway to clean a theatre while talking to my projectionist. I walked into the theatre, got to the top, and started cleaning the top row. I saw my projectionist cleaning at the bottom of the theatre, and as I turned and said, "Thanks for helping me," I realized there was no one there. I got out of the theatre, and he just started coming down from the booth. I asked him if he was in the theatre cleaning with me, and he said, "No, I went up to the booth when you walked into the theatre." The second one was another time I was cleaning theatres. I was in one theatre when I heard something move behind the screen. There's a 2-foot gap between the screen and the wall, and people put stuff back there, but I've never heard noises before. I was creeped out and left the theatre. The next theatre over was my next to clean, and when I was walking in I heard children laughing and running around. I turned the corner to look up, and there's no one there. The last story was when I was closing to turn off an IMAX. I was standing at the unit running the first part of the closing schedule when I heard the back door to the booth close. This is a stairwell that I'd only had the key to, and it's so out of the way that no one uses it. I started at the hallway waiting for someone to turn around the corner, but no one did. I finished starting the shutdown for the IMAX and heard the door close again. I ran over to the stairway, and the lights weren't even on, and there's no way anyone could have made it down the stairs to turn off the lights in that time, even if they did have the key. These experiences have creeped me out aplenty at night at the movie theatre. I used to work evenings at a movie theatre until late at night. Usually we would get off at 11, but some late night movies wouldn't end till 1 or 2 in the morning, so there were always cars in the parking lot. But a part of it would be open and illuminated by several streetlights, so it'd be easy to see someone standing in that area. One night I got off work and was sitting on the steps to the theatre, looking off into an empty parking lot and waiting for a relative to pick me up. We were texting back and forth, and he told me to meet him at a nearby restaurant as it would be easier to leave its driveway than the movie theatre, as it had different traffic. I got up and began walking. Part of the way over to the edge of the parking lot, I heard some stuff like ruffling or scraping. It just sounded like a shoe scraping along some gravel. I think it was just someone getting out of their car, but I never saw anyone pull up, and I'd been out there for some time. I turned around to see if I could help the person getting out. Considering I was still in uniform, I figured it could be someone asking me the time a film ended. I spun around, and there's some dude crouched amongst the row of cars. As soon as I turned around, he started quickly walking towards me all hunkered down. I've never sprinted so fast in my life. I didn't recognize them or know what their intentions were, but I didn't take any chances.
I am a 20-year-old female doing my first semester of college. I was working at a well-known grocery store that rhymes with hogger. I had really late hours to match my school schedule, and mostly worked 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. I actually really enjoy night shifts, as the overnight team of mostly guys were very sweet and protective. One night, two men came in about 30 minutes apart from each other, right before closing. They both gave me really weird compliments about my hair, skin, and body, and were just generally creepy. It's not uncommon, and I didn't think much of it, just to smile and wave. We close at 1 a.m, and it normally takes me a few minutes to close up. I grab my things, call an Uber, and wait in the lobby right inside the locked doors playing on my phone, until I hear an intense knocking on the window. These two men are standing right in front of me, waving their arms and begging me to come outside. Not knowing what to do, but not about to be dumbass and get taken, I tell them 1 sec and run back inside and tell the overnight guys what's happening. They're furious, and they're all quite intimidating, so I walk back to the lobby with them to get my Uber, and these guys outside glare at me before running away. What losers, waiting outside my job at 1:30 a.m. But still, let's not meet again. I work the night shift at an alarm company and monitor alarms, residential and commercial, all throughout the night. I work completely by myself, and it's a rather small office with about 6 to 7 rooms, including the front desk and a conference room. So it's like every other night. I go in and out of my office during the night to use the restroom or fill up my water bottle. Nothing was out of the ordinary. A few hours later, I go out to the restroom and notice the light in the front desk area was on. It certainly was not on the last few times I went there, and I would have seen it. I'm not one to scare easily at all, but that was weird. I went in, turned the light switch off, and went about my night not thinking twice about it. From inside my office, I monitor cameras to the office, so I would have seen anyone if they were there. A few minutes later, I get a phone call, which is kind of unusual at that particular time, but I answered, and no one spoke. I heard something, slight movements I guess, enough to know there was someone on the other end. I said hello a few times, and I took the number of who's calling, and it said Conference 1. The conference room was a few feet away from me. I hang up immediately. I look at the Conference 1 camera, and there's nothing. It's all clear. The phone is where it's been all night, and I go out to the conference room to be met with nothing. All is quiet, all is clear, and I was a little shook by this. But again, if I don't see it, I won't let it get to me. I shrugged it off and tried not to think about it too much. Fortunately, nothing happened for the rest of my shift. When I was younger, I used to work as a security guard in the Louvre, where the Mona Lisa is. I worked the day shift, which was my part-time student job, and I heard some spooky stories from the night shift crew. There was this corridor with swords on both sides, and this security guard was walking by with his torch, and suddenly something pulled his jacket that made him almost fall. He turned around and nothing was there. He was screaming down the walkie-talkie that someone had to go and bring him to the main room. They checked the cameras and saw that his jacket just got pulled mid-air. The next day, when they reported it to the chief of security, he told them to disregard this, and since that day, they always do their rounds with 2 guards. There are so many more stories of that place. We should not forget, many people have died in there of violent deaths.